Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. I started up the trail late, way later than I should have. I knew better. The plan had been to start hiking before noon, reach the lookout by 4, and make it back down before dark. But life happened. I left work late, sat in traffic longer than expected, and by the time I pulled into the tiny dirt parking lot of the trailhead, the sun was already past its peak. I debated turning around, but I needed this. I needed to be alone to get my head right. The week had been too much. My job, my roommate, my ex blowing on my phone again. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed a light jacket into it, a water bottle, my phone, and a small headlamp just in case. I didn't plan to be out long enough to need it, but still, the trail was quiet. It was a Thursday, and the place wasn't that popular anyway. It wound through second-growth forest, thick with underbrush and moss-covered rocks. Trees leaned in over the dirt path like they were trying to touch each other overhead. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No traffic noise, no birds. Just the sound of my own breathing, my boots on packed dirt, the occasional crunch of gravel. The first mile or so was easy. I kept a steady pace, breathing through my nose, trying not to let my thoughts wander too much. I had my headphones in at first, but after about 20 minutes I took them out. Something about the silence felt better, like I needed to hear the forest, even if it was unsettling. About halfway up, the sun started dropping fast. I hadn't really paid attention at the time, but when the lights started to go from golden to gray, I stopped and checked my phone. 6:41 p.m. That didn't leave me much time. I was just under a mile from the overlook, and I told myself I'd just push hard to get there, take a picture, then double time it back down. I wanted that view. I told myself it would be worth it. I made it to the overlook at 7:08. The sun was just touching the edge of the mountains, casting long shadows over the valley. The lookout was a flat outcropping of rock, maybe 30 feet wide, with a steep drop-off on 3 sides. From up there, I could see the trees for miles. Everything looked soft and blue in the fading light. I stood there for a moment, trying to take it all in. Just breathe. Then I felt the cold. The temperature had dropped fast, and the wind was picking up. I threw on my jacket, drank the last of my water, and started back down. That's when it hit me how dark it had gotten. The trees swallowed the light. What had been golden an hour ago was now a deep, cold blue-gray. I pulled the headlamp out of my pack and turned it on. The beam was narrow and flickered for a second before staying steady. I checked my phone again. No signal. I wasn't surprised, but it still made me nervous. The forest at night is different. Things look different. Trees seem closer together. Every sound is louder. I told myself not to freak out. I've hiked before. I've been out late before. I just had to follow the trail. No problem. The first part of the hike down was fine. Steep, but manageable. The headlamp lit maybe 10 feet ahead of me. I kept my eyes on the trail, careful not to slip on loose rocks or roots. I moved fast, trying to make up time, but not so fast I'd hurt myself. My mind was in a weird place. On edge. Not panicked, but close. I kept hearing little sounds in the woods to the left and right. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but I told myself it was squirrels, maybe a raccoon. That's all. It was their home, not mine. They were just going about their business. Then I heard footsteps. Not mine. Not the echo of my own. These were different. Slower. Heavier. I stopped. The sound stopped. I turned off the headlamp and stood still. Listened. Nothing. I waited for maybe 30 seconds. My heart was pounding. I turned the light back on and kept walking. About 2 minutes later, I heard again. Behind me, maybe 20 or 30 feet back. Leaves crunching. Another pause. Then a branch snapped, louder this time. I spun around, my light scanning the trees. Nothing. I stayed there, light aimed into the trees, not moving. My breathing was too loud in my ears. I tried to slow it down. Probably a deer. I whispered, though saying it out loud didn't help. I kept walking a little faster now. The sound came back. Closer. Still behind me, but closer. More deliberate. I stopped again, then stepped off the trail, crouched behind a large tree, and turned off my light. I stayed there, not moving, letting my eyes adjust. The forest wasn't pitch black, but close. I could see just enough shapes to know where the trees were, where the trail was. Then I saw a shape move across the trail. It wasn't an animal. It was upright. Human. They didn't have a light. They didn't make any noise now. Just walked slowly, then stopped like they were listening. I stayed still, my breath shallow. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. They stood there for maybe a full minute. Then they kept walking down the trail, the same direction I had been going. I waited. 5 minutes, maybe 10. Then I moved. Quietly, I circled off the trail through the trees. I knew it was dangerous to leave the path, especially in the dark, but I didn't want to get close to whoever that was. Something about the way they moved, too slow, too careful, like they were trying not to be heard, like they were hunting. I moved through the trees, keeping the trail to my right. I didn't use my light. I used my hands to feel in front of me, to make sure I didn't walk straight into a branch or trip on something. I was freezing. My jacket wasn't warm enough, and the cold air clung to my skin. I stepped carefully, trying not to make noise, but the forest floor was littered with leaves and twigs. Every step felt too loud. I lost the trail. I kept walking downhill, hoping I'd cross it again, but nothing looked familiar. Every tree looked the same. The dark was total now, and the headlamp felt useless. Every time I turned it on, I imagined it lighting me up like a spotlight. So I left it off. Then I heard the footsteps again. To my right this time. I froze. They were closer. Then silence. I crouched low, crawled behind a fallen log, and laid flat. I stayed there for what felt like forever. No sounds, no movement. I started to shake, not from fear but cold. My hands were numb, and I couldn't stop my teeth from chattering. I thought about calling for help, but there was no signal, and yelling would give me away. I looked at my phone again. 8:26 p.m. Battery at 24%. I had to move. I crawled out from behind the log, stood up, and started walking again. Slowly, carefully. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just wanted to get out, to reach a road, a house, anything. Then I saw a light, a small one, dim, moving. It wasn't a flashlight. It was more like a phone screen. Someone holding it low, walking slowly uphill. They weren't making any sound. I dropped flat again, watched the light move through the trees, maybe 50 feet ahead of me. It passed by, slow and steady, then faded into the trees. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, I got up and walked the other direction. I don't know how far I went. Maybe a mile, maybe more. I didn't know where I was anymore. My legs were aching. My throat was dry. I hadn't brought food, and my stomach was starting to hurt. The cold was worse now. Every time the wind blew, I had to stop and brace against it. Then, like a miracle, I saw something through the trees, a shape. Not natural, straight lines, a building. I didn't think. I just ran. It turned out to be an old shed. Maybe part of a ranger station once, but long abandoned. The door was hanging off one hinge. Inside, it smelled like rotten dirt, but it was shelter. I closed the door as best I could, dragged an old crate in front of it, and sat in the corner, hugging my knees to my chest. I stayed there the rest of the night. Every time I heard a sound, I held my breath. Every creak, every gust of wind, every imagined footstep outside made my heart stop. But nothing happened. No one came. When the first light of dawn came through the cracks in the wood, I finally stepped outside. The forest looked different in the daylight. Smaller, less threatening. I found a trail not far from a shed. Not the one I came in on, but it led downhill. I followed it. After maybe 45 minutes, I reached a service road. From there, I walked until I found a small campground with a ranger station. It was closed, but there were cars, and eventually a couple came by walking their dog. They gave me water and a granola bar. Called the ranger. I told them I got turned around after hiking too late. I didn't mention a man in the woods. I didn't want to answer questions I couldn't explain. The ranger gave me a ride back to my car. It was still there, alone in the dirt lot. I didn't go hiking alone again for a long time. But the part that stays with me the most isn't the fear or the cold or even getting lost. It's the way that person walked. So quiet, so patient, like they had all the time in the world, and they didn't bring a light. I remember the first time my former teacher told me her story. She swore it was true, and ever since then, it has stuck with me in the back of my mind. It wasn't like one of those ghost stories or fairy tales with monsters and magic. It was something different, something strange, quiet, and chilling because it felt real, like it could happen to anyone. She told me that when she was a child, she shared a bedroom with her younger sister. The room was small and simple, the kind most kids have. 2 beds pushed against opposite walls, a dresser in the corner, and a window with thin curtains that barely kept out the streetlight. The beds were old wooden frames with faded sheets and a few stuffed animals lined up on the pillows. It was the kind of room where you felt safe because your family was close by, but at night, when the house was still, everything felt a little different. One night, my teacher was lying in her bed, the covers pulled up to her chin, half asleep, when her sister suddenly whispered to her. Her voice was low and shaky, barely louder than the sound of the wind tapping against the window. The sister told her to look toward the door. She wasn't sure why, but she obeyed. Her eyes were still adjusting to the darkness, and at first, she couldn't see anything. Then slowly, out of the shadow, a shape appeared, a silhouette of a man standing right in the doorway. The shape was tall, standing perfectly still, and blocking the dim light from the hallway. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, didn't make a sound. It just stood there like a statue, and for a moment my teacher froze. Her heart started pounding hard enough she thought it might burst. She wanted to scream, but couldn't. Her sister's hand was cold and trembling as it gripped hers. Next to her bed was a light switch. On a normal night, she might have left it alone, afraid of the dark, but this time, her fear pushed her to act. She reached out and flipped the switch. The light filled the room instantly, but the doorway was empty. There was no tall man, no shadow, nothing but the plain wooden door frame and the hallway beyond. The light felt like it burned away the figure, but the terror didn't leave her. They called for their father. He came in quickly, his face creased with concern. When they told him what they saw, he told them it was probably just their eyes playing tricks in the dark, that shadows and imagination often make things look scary at night. He didn't sound scared. He sounded like a grown-up trying to keep 2 little girls calm. The next day, my teacher went downstairs early. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the kitchen clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. She found her father sitting at the kitchen table, staring ahead with no expression on his face. He didn't turn to look at her at first. When she asked him what was wrong, he finally looked at her with tired eyes and asked if the man they saw was tall. It wasn't just that night. Over the years, different members of the family saw the silhouette multiple times. Each time, it was the same pattern. They'd see the tall man standing in the doorway or somewhere near the edge of a room. They'd flip on the light, and no one would be there. No footsteps, no signs of anyone leaving, just the empty space where the figure had been. No one knew who the man was or why he appeared. There were no forced entries, no signs of a break-in or a prowler. The family checked the locks, the windows, the whole house. Nothing was ever disturbed or missing. The police were never involved because there was no proof, no crime. Just a shadow that appeared and disappeared without a trace. Sometimes the figure showed up during the day, but more often at night when the house was quiet and everyone was alone in their rooms. The feeling it left wasn't one of menace or anger, but of something watching, something patient and steady, like a silent observer standing just out of reach. The family never felt like it wanted to hurt them, but the presence was enough to make them uneasy and keep their eyes glued to the door, the hallway, the edges of their vision. The house itself wasn't new or old, just a regular family home in a quiet neighborhood. There were no strange noises or creaks that couldn't be explained. No weird smells or cold spots that the family could remember. It was normal in every way except for that shadowy figure. No one could explain it. They never spoke about it openly, but the fear lingered like a quiet secret. As years passed, the sightings slowed but never stopped. My teacher said it was like the figure had a schedule, appearing when it wanted, but never crossing the line into the light, never stepping fully inside the room. It was always just a shadow, a shape, something half there and half not. One day, when my teacher was older and more curious, she tried to figure out what it might be. She asked her family if anyone had ever seen anyone outside the house, or if any stranger had ever been around. No one had. She looked at the house from every angle, checking the windows, the front yard, the backyard. Nothing seemed out of place. No tracks, no signs of anyone lurking nearby. Sometimes she thought it might be her own mind playing tricks. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a weird reflection, or just the way the human brain fills in the dark with shapes that look like people. But that didn't explain why the whole family saw it, why it showed up again and again, and why it always disappeared when the lights came on. She never found an answer. The figure remained a mystery, an unexplained shadow that visited her family over the years, never harming them, but never leaving either. It was like something stuck between worlds, or maybe just a reminder that some things can't be explained no matter how much you want to understand. The story stayed with me long after she told it. I kept thinking about how normal and ordinary the house must have seemed during the day, how peaceful the neighborhood must have been. And yet, at night, behind closed doors, something watched quietly from the shadows, waiting, always just out of sight. It's the kind of story that makes you glance over your shoulder, makes you wonder if the shadows you see are really empty or if something else is standing there, waiting for the light to go out. Not a ghost, not a monster, just a man-shaped shadow that might be real in some way. And that's what makes it so haunting. Because it isn't a story made up for scares. It's a story about the strange things that can quietly live in the spaces where we think we're safe. When I was in high school, I had a class in this old building everyone called the Orange Hall. It wasn't really orange anymore, more like a faded, rusty color from years of peeling paint and grime, but the name stuck. It was one of those long, narrow buildings with high ceilings and small windows set near the top of the walls. The hallways always felt a little colder and quieter than the rest of the school, like the noise from the other buildings couldn't quite reach inside. I remember that class clearly because every day, without fail, I would hear someone whistling this song, Pop Goes the Weasel. But it wasn't just the song. It was the way it was whistled, slow, almost dragging, like someone was forcing themselves to whistle out painfully and deliberately. Not the usual cheerful, fast tune you might expect. It was slow and kind of off, like someone was dragging the notes out longer than they should be. I remember how it made me feel uneasy after a while. At first, it was just annoying, like some kid nearby was trying to get attention or mess with me during class. But after a few weeks, it started feeling different, almost like it was coming from all around me, not just one person. No one ever talked about it, and no one I asked ever heard it. Sometimes I thought maybe I was imagining it, or it was just in my head because I was stressed about school or bored in class. But it was too real for that. The sound was clear. It echoed down the long hallways. Sometimes it seemed like the whistling was coming from just outside the classroom door, or somewhere near the lockers at the far end of the hall. But whenever I looked or tried to find the source, no one was there. The halls were always empty, especially during class when most students were in their rooms. Years went by. I graduated and moved on, but the Orange Hall stuck with me in my mind because of that strange whistling. Then 2 years later, I had another class scheduled in the same hall, this time for an evening adult education course I was taking. I didn't expect to hear anything unusual, but almost right away, that slow, dragging whistle started again. It was exactly the same, like a memory or a ghost of that sound, but without any obvious person making it. I looked everywhere. I checked every door, every corner, and every classroom. I asked the janitor if he'd ever heard it, but he just shrugged and said the place was old, and old buildings make weird noises sometimes. But this was different. It was too melodic and too purposeful to be a random noise. This happened for almost the entire semester. Nearly every evening, at around the same time, the whistle would start. It wasn't loud, but it was there, slow and persistent. I never saw anyone, and it never came closer. It just floated through the halls, drifting like a bad memory. It was strange and creepy, but there was no logic to explain it. Years later, my little sister started high school, and because of a school district, she ended up having classes in the same Orange Hall. She's a lot younger than me, so I thought maybe it was a coincidence. But then she told me something that made my skin crawl. She said her friend mentioned hearing someone whistling the same song in the hallways. Not just once or twice, but almost every day. My sister found it weird and asked her teacher about it. The teacher didn't seem surprised. In fact, she said it's been going on for at least 10 years, always around the same time, every day. The school staff never found anyone whistling, even though multiple students reported it. No one knew where the sound came from. No one could explain it. There were no cameras in the hall, and the building is so old that some areas have peeling floorboards and hollow walls. It was like the whistle belonged to the building itself. When my sister told me this, I felt like I was hearing my own story all over again. It wasn't just in my head or some one-off weird thing. It was a real, ongoing mystery that even the school couldn't solve. I started thinking about everything. The time I first heard it, how it followed me back when I returned from my night classes, and now how it's still happening for my sister and her classmates. The sound is so strange because it's impossible to ignore. It's the kind of whistle you remember, slow, sad, and dragging, like someone forcing a tune out in a place that wants to hold on to it for some reason. The halls of Orange Hall have changed over the years. Some classrooms got new floors, fresh paint, and new lights. Yet the whistle remains. It's like a slow rhythm in the background of the building's life. I went back to visit the school once, years after graduating, just to walk through the Orange Hall again. The hall was quieter than I remembered. The walls had cracks that looked like old scars, and the windows were cloudy with dust. I wandered slowly through the long corridor, my footsteps echoing off the empty floor. I listened hard, hoping to hear the whistle again, just to prove it was still there. And sure enough, after a few minutes, I heard it faintly, soft, slow, dragging. No words, just a tune like someone whistling quietly from a room far down the hall. I followed the sound for a while, but it seemed to move away like it was always just out of reach. I tried to catch a glimpse of whoever might be whistling, but no one appeared. I thought about asking other people, teachers, staff, or students, but no one ever had a good answer. Some said it was probably a student playing a prank, but how could someone do it for 10 years without being caught? Others said it might be an old recording from a broken speaker or an echo trapped inside the walls. But nothing was ever found. The thing is, it doesn't feel like a prank or a broken machine. It feels like something caught in time, stuck repeating the same slow whistle over and over, day after day, year after year. The building almost seems to breathe the tune out like it's a secret it can't let go of. I think that's what's most unsettling. It's not scary because it's supernatural or ghostly. It's scary because it's real. It's a sound with no clear source, playing in a place full of people who hear it but never find it. It makes the Orange Hall feel like a place suspended in time, holding on to something just beyond understanding. I've tried to explain it logically. Maybe it's a student who learned to whistle that tune slowly and quietly and never got caught, passing the habit down to others somehow. Or maybe it's some quirk in the building's design, an echo chamber that carries sound for miles, twisting them until they sound like whistling. But no matter what, I know this, the whistle isn't going away. It's become part of that place's identity. And if you ever find yourself walking through an old school building late in the day, listen carefully. You might hear it too, the slow, dragging whistle of Pop Goes the Weasel, echoing through a hallway that never forgets. I was in high school when it happened. It was one of those ordinary afternoons where everything feels normal, but that day, something fell off from the moment I stepped off the bus. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the neighborhood, and I was walking up the driveway toward my house. My backpack felt heavy, but that was nothing new after a long day of classes and homework. The bus dropped me off at the usual spot. The street was quiet, mostly empty except for a few cars parked along the curb and a couple of neighbors doing their usual evening routines, mowing lawns, pulling weeds, or just sitting on their porches. I was used to the peacefulness here, a small suburban neighborhood where everyone seemed to know everyone else, or at least that's how it felt. I reached my front door and pulled out the keys. I remember fumbling with the ring, trying to find the right one as I glanced down at the cracked concrete of the driveway. The sound of my keys jingling echoed a little in the cool air. That's when I first noticed him. He wasn't far off, maybe 30 feet away, walking slowly across the lawn. A grown man, probably in his late 30s or early 40s. His clothes were worn and dirty, like he hadn't had a good shower in days. His hair was messy, and there was something in the way he moved that set my teeth on edge. I can't explain it exactly, but he didn't look like he belonged here. As I kept trying to unlock the door, he got closer, just walking right toward me without any hesitation. It was the kind of walk where you know the person is looking for something, and it's not good. My heart started beating faster, and my fingers tightened around the keys. He stopped just a few feet away, right on the edge of the porch. He looked at me with tired eyes, but there was something hard and cold in them, like he was sizing me up, deciding if I was a threat or not. I didn't say anything, just shook my head to let him know I had no money or anything to give. That didn't stop him. He kept inching closer, his steps slow but steady. My stomach twisted into knots. I could feel the weight of the moment. The way time seemed to stretch, every small sound amplified. The soft rustling of the wind through the trees, the faint creak of the porch beneath my feet, the distant bark of a dog. Bear, my German Shepherd, was inside the house. He was big, solid black, and built like a tank, 100 pounds of muscle and loyalty wrapped up in fur. Bear wasn't just a pet. He was my protector, trained to guard and fiercely territorial. He had saved me more times than I could count just by being there. Suddenly, I heard the low rumble of Bear's bark from inside. It was the kind of bark that makes your skin crawl if you don't know the dog, a deep guttural sound that warns you something isn't right. I moved a little faster, juggling my keys in one hand while pushing the door handle with the other. Bear burst through the door in one solid motion, teeth bared and lips curled back in a growl that sounded like thunder. His eyes were locked on the man, his whole body tense and ready to attack if needed. The man froze for a split second when Bear appeared, his expression changing from casual to something else entirely: fear. Bear didn't hesitate. He barked and growled louder, his whole frame shaking with the intensity of his warning. I could see the man's eyes dart around, looking for an escape. Without another word, he turned and ran off the lawn, disappearing down the street before I could even blink. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, staring after him until he was gone. Bear stayed right by my side, still alert, growling low for a few moments longer before calming down. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I didn't have to imagine what might have happened if Bear hadn't been there. The thought alone was enough to make my hands shake. Later that night, I kept replaying the moment in my head. How close it had been, how small I felt facing a stranger like that. But Bear was there, steady and strong, and that made all the difference. He was more than a dog. He was my guardian. After that day, I never took my safety for granted again. I made sure Bear was always near, especially when I was alone. The memory of that man on my lawn stayed with me, a sharp reminder that sometimes danger doesn't announce itself with loud noises or flashing lights. It just shows up quiet and steady until something or someone stands up to it. And for me, that someone was Bear. I used to work as a cleaner at my school after classes finished. The shifts were late, usually from around 3:30 in the afternoon until 6:30 or 7. By the time I left, the roads were pretty quiet. Most of the other students had already walked home, and the streets were nearly empty except for the occasional car passing through or a neighbor walking their dog. It was a kind of peaceful silence you get when the day is winding down, but the quiet also made the evenings feel a little lonelier. I was 16 back then, trying to earn some money for things like clothes and a phone bill. Cleaning wasn't glamorous, but it was straightforward work, mopping floors, wiping desks, emptying bins. It gave me a little time alone, which I liked, and I wasn't worried about much except getting the job done and heading home. One particular afternoon, as I was walking home after my shift, I noticed a man walking a few steps behind me. He wasn't close enough to make me jump, but it was clear he was following me. I remember his face because it stood out in a way I couldn't explain at the time. His skin looked almost fake, like plastic, smooth and shiny, and there was this small, subtle smile on his lips that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't a friendly smile. It felt forced, almost like a mask. His eyes were cold, and he didn't say a word. That first time I saw him, I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. Maybe he was just walking the same way home, or maybe he was heading somewhere nearby. I didn't say anything to anyone because I didn't want to seem paranoid. After all, it was just one time and the streets were quiet, so maybe it wasn't that strange. But then, about 2 weeks later, I saw him again. Same road, same time, same quiet street. And then I saw him again the next day and the day after that. Every single day, he was there, always following me at the same distance, always with that same creepy smile. It wasn't like he was running after me or trying to hide. He just walked slowly, keeping pace, as if he was waiting for me to notice. I never said anything to my parents. At 16, I knew if I told them, they would want to pick me up and drop me off at school, or maybe call the police. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Plus, part of me felt embarrassed, like I was making it up or overreacting. So I kept quiet and tried to change my route, but somehow I would still see him on other streets, like he was always there. One weekend, I was walking to my friend's house. The route was similar to the one I took from school, so I was already on edge. The sun was setting, and the shadows were getting longer on the pavement. It was that time when the streetlights flicker on, and the air feels colder, heavier. As I walked up the main road, the same one he usually followed me on after school, I happened to glance over at a minibus parked near the end of the street. It was old, faded, and covered in patches of dirt, the kind of vehicle that looked like it hadn't moved in a while. I swear to God, the man was sitting in the driver's seat. His face was pressed against the window, staring right at me with that same plasticky smile. The way he looked through the glass was like he was waiting, expecting me to come closer. My heart pounded, and I pulled out my phone, calling my friend as quietly as I could without hanging up. I tried to make it sound like I was just talking normally, hoping that if he heard someone else on the line with me, he might back off. But as soon as I turned the corner, I felt it again, the sense that he was right behind me. When I glanced back, he was only about 2 meters away, walking at the same slow pace, that same strange smile on his face, eyes never leaving mine. My legs started to move faster, shifting from a walk to a hurried pace, almost a run. I could hear his footsteps matching mine perfectly, never speeding up, never slowing down, just keeping the same distance. I kept my phone in my ear and told my friend to open the door and wait for me. I didn't want to hang up in case he was listening. Every second felt like it was dragging, my breath coming out in quick, shallow gasps as I tried to ignore the pounding in my chest. When I finally reached my friend's house, I ran inside and slammed the door shut behind me. We locked it tight, pulled the curtains, and sat in the dark, breathing heavily, listening. Outside, I could still hear him standing there for what felt like hours, just staring through the window. We didn't say much, just sat quietly, waiting for him to leave. Eventually, after what seemed like 2 hours, the footsteps disappeared and the night grew silent again. After that night, I never saw him again. I try not to think about it, but every time I passed that street, I looked at the corner where the minibus was parked. When I moved away from the area months later, I thought that chapter was closed. But last weekend, when I went back to visit my parents, I noticed the minibus was still there, parked in exactly the same spot at the bottom of the road. It looked even more worn down, but it hadn't moved. I asked my parents about it, but they just shrugged it off, saying it had been there for years. Still, seeing it brought all the old memories back, the slow footsteps, that fake smile, and the feeling of being watched. It was a chilling reminder that some things don't just disappear, even when you want them to. When I was about 15, something happened in my family that still sticks with me, even years later. It's not the kind of story people expect to hear, and it wasn't like a ghost story or anything spooky in the usual way. It was real, and it shook me to my core. I never forgot it, because it felt like the ground beneath me was shifting, but no one else around me seemed to notice. It started one ordinary afternoon. My little sister, who was maybe 3 or 4 years old at the time, was wandering around the house like she usually did. She was at that age where she copied everything adults did, tried to be just like mom and dad. Sometimes she'd pretend to talk on the phone, or she'd hold her hands like she was reading a book, even though she couldn't read yet. That day, she was in the bathroom for a while. I didn't think much of it at first. Later, I found her sitting on the floor by the sink, looking pale and kind of out of it. It wasn't normal. I went over and asked her what was wrong, and she just said something that didn't make sense at first. She told us she drank some green stuff. We looked at the bathroom sink and saw this small bottle of nail polish remover. The bottle was greenish and it was open. It was one of those little things you wouldn't expect a kid to get into easily, but somehow she did. We didn't know what to do. Panic set in quickly. My mom grabbed the phone and called the neighborhood pharmacy. The assistant there was quick to respond, telling us to rush over some Ipecac to make her throw up. I remember feeling helpless and terrified. My sister was crying quietly, her little body trembling on the cold bathroom floor. She kept clutching her stomach, telling us how much it hurt. The whole house felt heavy with worry. While we waited for the medicine to arrive, my sister said something that didn't fit with the way a little kid normally talks. She said she had died one time. She said it like it was a fact, not a story or pretend. She said she drank some green stuff and died, just like she had that day. Then she told us about a husband who ran off with a girl and how she got so sad she drank the green stuff and died. She said her girls cried and were sad when she died. The words came out so plainly, like she was telling us something she expected us to believe. It wasn't the kind of thing you hear from a kid, and it wasn't the kind of thing you want to hear when you're already scared that she might be seriously hurt. My parents and I just froze, not knowing what to say. I could tell that my sister was struggling, but there was something in the way she said those words that didn't feel like just a confused little kid's imagination. It was something else, something deeper. When the medicine finally arrived, my mom gave it to her and kept an eye on her. After a while, my sister started to feel a bit better, her color slowly coming back. The pain in her stomach faded. She wasn't herself yet, but she was alive and breathing, and that was all we could focus on. We never really talked about what she said again, but it stayed in my head. Looking back, the whole experience was like walking through a thick fog. Everything was clear and normal one moment, then completely strange the next. I still think about what she said, the way she talked about dying, about sadness so deep it made her drink something deadly. It was so real, so raw. And it wasn't because she was making it up. It was something she felt, something inside her that came out in words too heavy for a little kid. It made me realize how much kids understand, even when we don't expect them to. It made me see how pain and sadness can live inside a person, no matter their age. And it made me appreciate the quiet moments, the small signs, because sometimes those moments tell us more than words ever could. That day changed the way I saw my sister and my family. It showed me that even the simplest things, a bottle of green nail polish remover, a few words from a kid, can open up a whole world of feelings and truths we don't always want to face. But it also reminded me how strong we can be, how we can pull through even the scariest moments if we hold on tight and don't let go. She's fine now. She grew up healthy and happy, but that story stays with me. It's a reminder that life is fragile, and sometimes the things we don't fully understand are the ones that matter the most. When I was 18, my grandfather was having serious heart problems. It was a slow, quiet time for both of us. After my grandmother died 3 months earlier, he became very lonely. I started waking up early every morning to go to his house. It was close by, just a few blocks down the street, so it didn't take long to get there. Each day, I would just sit with him, talk to him about whatever came to mind, help him around the house, and watch TV with him. Those days were simple and calm. But I will never forget exactly what happened on one particular morning in June. It still feels strange, like something I can't explain. That day was June 7th. I woke up early and got ready, just like I always did. The sun was just starting to shine, and there was a cool breeze that made the leaves on the trees sway gently. I grabbed my jacket, locked my door, and walked to my grandfather's house. When I got there, the front door was open a little bit. I wasn't worried. It was always like that during the summer months because he liked fresh air. When I stepped inside, I saw him sitting in his favorite armchair near the window. The morning light fell across his face, and he had the biggest smile I had seen on him in months. His smile was wide and real, not forced or tired like I'd seen before. The lines on his face softened, and his eyes shone. I felt a wave of happiness because it was so rare to see him like that. Usually, he was quiet, sometimes angry, sometimes sad. But that day, he looked peaceful, calm, almost as if he was waiting for something good. I sat down in the chair next to him and looked at him closely. His skin was pale, but his smile lit up the room. He looked at me and said something I will never forget. He said, "Guess what? I'm going to see your grandmother in 2 days." At first, I thought he was confused, or maybe his heart medicine was making him delirious. I didn't know how to respond. It was strange, even creepy, but there was something in his voice that was calm and sure, not scared or confused. I didn't say anything, just nodded slowly. He smiled again and looked out the window, as if he could already see her waiting for him. The next 2 days were unlike any other I spent with him. He was quiet but happy. He didn't complain about the pain or the discomfort that usually came with his heart condition. He ate his meals slowly and carefully, but with a small smile, as if tasting something sweet in the food. When I helped him walk around the house, he moved with more strength and steadiness than I had seen in months. He watched his favorite TV shows and sometimes just stared out the window for long minutes. It felt like those 2 days were filled with a strange kind of peace. The house was still, almost like it was holding its breath. I thought about what he said again and again. How could he know he was going to die? How could he be so certain about something none of us could predict? I tried to push the thought away, telling myself maybe he just meant he would be with her again someday, or maybe it was a way of accepting the end. On the second night, I stayed late with him. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the old clock in the living room. His breathing was calm, and he smiled again when I held his hand. I told him I loved him, and he squeezed my hand lightly in return. That was the last time I saw him awake. The next morning, I came over early like always, but he didn't answer when I called his name. I found him in his chair, peaceful and still, like he was sleeping. He had passed away during the night. I felt a cold shock go through me, but at the same time, I felt something else, a strange calmness. It was as if he was ready, as if those last 2 days were his way of saying goodbye. Not just to me, but to the world. He wasn't afraid. He didn't fight it. The days that followed were difficult. The house felt empty and cold without him. I went there every day at first, but the silence was heavier than before. I kept thinking about that smile and what he said. It haunted me in a way that scared me. Not because of ghosts or anything like that, but because it was real. It was as if he had known exactly when his time would come, and he accepted it without fear. I tried to tell myself that maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was confused, or maybe he said it as a wish. But every time I think back, the way he looked at me, the way he smiled like he was seeing something no one else could see, it feels like he really knew. That knowledge gave him peace, and somehow it passed on to me too. In the end, I don't have answers. I don't know how he knew, but I do know that those last days with him changed something inside me. It made me believe that sometimes people can sense things beyond what we understand. That sometimes the heart knows its own time, and when it does, it lets go gently. Now, years later, whenever I think of my grandfather, I don't just remember the sadness of losing him. I remember his smile on that June morning, the peace in his eyes, and the quiet courage he showed in those last 2 days. It's a memory that stays with me, a reminder that even in the hardest moments, there can be calm and acceptance. And maybe, just maybe, there's something deeper in us all that knows when it's time to say goodbye. I lived in an old apartment in Oslo, in a building from the mid-1800s. The place had this strange vibe that I couldn't explain. There were 3 of us sharing it, 2 girls and me. I don't know if it was the age of the building or something else, but from the moment I moved in, I felt off. The walls were thick, made of old brick and plaster, with the kind of creaks and groans you'd expect in a place that had seen well over a century of winters and summers. The floors were wooden, old and uneven, with some boards creaking louder than others under your footsteps. The windows were large, with thick wooden frames and single panes that let in the cold winter air, but they looked out over the narrow cobblestone street below, giving the place a kind of old-world charm. But charm didn't cover the feeling I got every time I crossed the threshold into the apartment. It wasn't a sense of danger exactly. It was more like the whole place was holding its breath, like it was waiting for something. The kind of silence that isn't just quiet, but heavy, almost pressing down on you. There was one room I never wanted to enter unless I had to. It was at the far end of the apartment, down a narrow hallway off the kitchen. You'd think it might be a guest room or an extra bedroom, but it was strange. Even when the heating was on full blast and the rest of the apartment was warm and cozy, that room stayed cold. The kind of cold that felt like it wasn't just the temperature, like it reached into your skin and made your blood slow down. You could see your breath in there, even in the middle of summer. The air was thick, almost damp, and it smelled faintly of something old and forgotten, like mildew mixed with dust and something else I couldn't identify. I tried to spend as little time in there as possible. When I had to go in to grab something, I'd keep the door open a crack and try not to look around. The moment I stepped inside, my head would start filling with the worst thoughts. Not conscious ones, but feelings, images that flashed through my mind like a movie in the dark. Children crying, soft and scared, their voices so faint I could barely make out words. Not the happy kind of crying, but the kind you hear when something is wrong and no one is there to help. I feel like someone was watching, waiting just beyond the edge of the room. I could never stay in there for more than a minute or two before I had to get out. The rest of the apartment didn't feel quite so bad, but that room cast a long shadow over the whole place. I wondered if the previous tenants had noticed it or if it was just me. Maybe the building itself had secrets. The city was old, and many of these old buildings had long, complicated histories, sometimes dark ones. My room was the old living room, a big space with tall ceilings and a big window that looked out onto the street below. The walls were painted a pale cream, but the paint was cracked and peeling in places. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the fireplace was old and unused, with a thick layer of dust inside. At night, the shadows from the window frames stretched across the floor and the walls, making the room feel larger and emptier than it was. One morning, I woke up to the sound of growling. It wasn't soft or distant. It was right there, loud and low, like a big cat or a snarling dog. The kind of growl that makes your skin crawl. I opened my eyes, but the room was dark, just a pale light coming through the curtains. At first, I thought it was a dream, but the growling didn't stop. It filled the room, deep and heavy, vibrating in the air. I tried to move, to sit up, but I was pinned down, frozen in place. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would burst. I struggled to breathe, my chest tight. The growling continued, echoing in my ears, but when I finally managed to look around, there was nothing there. No animal, no person, no explanation. Just the silence of the old apartment. It felt like hours before I could move again. The experience left me shaken and scared, and I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept telling myself it was just a nightmare, maybe caused by stress or a bad dream. But the feeling stayed with me long after. The sense that something unseen was there waiting. The other girls I lived with didn't experience the same things. One of them had a young cat, only about a year old. The cat was playful and curious, always exploring the apartment, jumping onto windowsills and chasing dust particles in the sunlight. We all liked the cat. It was a little comfort in that strange place. But one day, the cat suddenly fell ill. We were just hanging out in the kitchen, and the cat was fine. Then, out of nowhere, we heard these awful sounds coming from the bathroom. It was the cat, lying on the cold tile floor, gasping and making horrible noises, a mix of choking and whimpering. Its tongue was out, and it seemed to be struggling to breathe. We tried to help, but there was nothing we could do. The cat's eyes were wide, scared, and it stopped moving after about 10 minutes. We had no idea what had caused it. There were no signs of injury or poison, and the vet couldn't find anything wrong. The whole thing was sudden and terrifying. It left us all shaken, and it felt like the apartment had taken something from us. That loss added to the weight of the place, making it feel even more suffocating. After that, I started looking for a new place. The apartment's weird vibe had become impossible to ignore. I tried to convince myself it was just old building quirks, drafts, and maybe my imagination, but the feelings, the growling, the cold room, It all felt too real. When I finally moved out, I felt a strange relief. I didn't look back. The new apartment was modern, bright, and warm. No cold rooms, no growls in the night, just quiet normalcy. Even now, I don't know what exactly happened in that old building. I'm not one to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. I'm a skeptic, always have been, but something was definitely wrong there. The building had a way of getting under your skin, of making you feel like you were not alone, and that whatever was there wasn't friendly. The whole experience left me cautious about old buildings and their histories. I still wonder about that cold room, what it was, why it felt so wrong, and the growling in my room. Whatever it was, I hope I never encounter anything like it again. My friend is exactly the kind of person you want around when life feels dull. She's always in the middle of some wild story, some ridiculous situation that sounds like it's straight out of a movie. I swear, half the reason I keep her in my life is for the entertainment. She brings the kind of chaos that makes you laugh, shake your head, and sometimes just wonder how the hell she ends up in these spots. But one night, the story she told me wasn't funny at all. Not even close. She was about 20 then, freshly past the legal drinking age, and she went out with a group of friends to this bar that was really popular in the city. Not a rough place, not even late or anything sketchy. It was just a regular Friday night, the kind of night where people come to unwind after work, have a few drinks, talk, and maybe dance a little. The place had that usual buzz. Music low enough so you could still talk, people scattered between the bar, booths, and a small dance floor. Outside was a decent-sized patio with some picnic tables and string lights that gave the whole area a cozy, relaxed vibe. The kind of place where you'd expect everything to be fine. She was there with a few friends, hanging out, having fun, nothing wild. She was the one always laughing the loudest, telling jokes, making faces. It was just a regular night that should have stayed that way. Near the edge of the patio, a few tables away, there was this group of guys. They weren't causing any trouble, just talking and drinking. From what she later told me, everything was normal until one of them suddenly got this look like someone had just pissed him off big time. It happened fast. One guy accused another of looking at his girlfriend the wrong way. The tension shot up like it was electric. There were harsh words, voices raised. The kind of argument where everyone's eyes go toward you, but no one wants to get involved. Then, without any warning, one guy just pulled a knife. Right there, in front of everyone. It wasn't a long fight. No punches, no shoving matches, just one quick, brutal moment. The guy with the knife stabbed the other in the stomach and immediately ran off, disappearing down an alley just beyond the bar's back exit. The victim collapsed right there on the patio, blood spreading on the wooden floor, soaking his shirt and pooling beneath him. My friend was frozen at first. The whole thing was surreal, like watching something that shouldn't be happening in real life. She told me later that she'd never seen anything like it before, and for a second, she thought maybe it was some messed up joke. But when she saw the guy's face go pale and his breathing getting shallow, everything clicked. She remembered her first aid training, stuff she'd learned in school, but never actually thought she'd need. She didn't hesitate. She pushed through the crowd that was starting to gather, people whispering and stepping back, scared or unsure what to do. She got right next to the man, who was gasping now, clutching his stomach where the blood was pouring out. She kept her voice calm, even though inside she was panicking, trying to ignore the pounding of her heart. She tore off the sleeve of her jacket, using it like a makeshift bandage to press firmly against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to stay steady. The minutes after that were a blur to her. She was focused only on keeping pressure on the wound, telling the man to stay awake and keep breathing, willing him not to pass out. She asked someone nearby to call 911, and that person disappeared into the crowd to make the call. The patio felt smaller suddenly, the air thick with the smell of blood and the tension of waiting. She kept talking to the injured man, trying to keep him conscious. His skin was cold and clammy. She could feel the rapid pulse in his neck, weak but still there. She checked his pupils, tried to keep track of his breathing. It felt like hours, but she later found out it was only about 20 minutes before the paramedics arrived. During that time, no one else really stepped up. People watched, some whispered prayers, Others just stayed quiet and afraid. But she was the one holding on to the thin line between life and death right there. When the paramedics finally showed up, it was like the whole world shifted. She eased off to the side, letting them take over, standing up slowly, feeling the cold sweat on her skin, the sticky wetness of blood from the man's wound still on her hands and clothes. She moved away and sat on a nearby bench, too drained to stand, too shocked to do anything else. She just sat there, wrapped in silence, the chaos around her now distant. Her body went into shock. She remembers feeling numb, the world spinning but moving slow, the cold seeping into her bones. People passed by, but she was invisible, lost in the aftermath of what had just happened. The paramedics noticed her then, giving her a blanket, talking to her quietly, making sure she was okay. She wasn't okay, not really. Her hands trembled, and she kept replaying the moment over and over. The man's face, his eyes pleading. The knife, the blood, the sudden violence that had erupted in a place that should have been safe. Eventually, friends found her, wrapped her up in a jacket, got her home safe. But it took hours before she stopped shaking, before the images stopped flashing in her mind every time she closed her eyes. That night left a mark on her that no joke, no crazy story could ever touch. The way she described it later, it wasn't about fear of the place or the people. It was the shock of how quickly things could turn deadly, how close life and death can be in a moment nobody expects. It made her see things differently. It made her realize how fragile everything is. The man survived, though it was touch and go for a while. The police caught the guy with the knife a few days later. My friend never went back to that bar. She still talks about the night sometimes, but never with the usual humor. It's not a story she tells to get laughs or shock people. It's a reminder, a moment frozen in time that changed her forever. That's why, when she tells me stories about getting lost or funny run-ins with strangers, I listen. But I also remember that night. The night that wasn't funny at all, the night she saw real danger and had to be more than just a bystander. It's the kind of story that stays with you. And I think, deep down, it's the one that made her who she is today. Stronger, sharper, and maybe just a little bit more careful about where she laughs and where she watches her back. When I was a kid, I had a strict bedtime rule. I had to be in bed by 8 o'clock sharp. It wasn't like I wanted to sleep early, but my parents were firm about it. Our house wasn't very big, just a small, 2-story with the bedrooms upstairs and the kitchen and living room down below. The hallway outside my room had a light that stayed on, casting a pale glow that stretched across the walls and floor. I used to lie in bed, staring at those thin rays of light stretching out like fingers reaching toward me. Sometimes I'd squint my eyes, try to make the light stretch longer and longer, watching the shadows dance and move as if they had their own life. It was quiet except for the muffled sound from downstairs, the faint clinking of dishes, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and my family laughing together in the kitchen. Their voices were like music, warm and safe, reminding me I was alone in my room, but not really alone in the house. That night, I remember feeling especially tired but also restless. I didn't want to close my eyes because something about the hallway light caught my attention more than usual. I focused on it, trying to stretch the light's fingers across the floor with my eyes half closed, hoping to see how far they could go. Then, out of nowhere, something appeared in that light. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It looked like an old lady standing in the hallway. She wasn't solid like a normal person, but kind of see-through, like a thin veil of smoke or a faint shadow. She had long, curly yellow hair that tumbled down her shoulders and a purple dress with little flowers on it. The dress looked old-fashioned, like something you'd see in a black and white movie. Her skin was pale, but not sickly, more like the color of old paper. What scared me most wasn't how she looked, but her smile. It was wide, stretched too far across her face, almost unnatural. The smile covered half her face like it was forced, but she wasn't angry or sad, just smiling at me, staring. That smile didn't feel like a friendly one. I wanted to scream, to call for my parents or my sister, but no sound came out. My mouth opened, but it was like my voice had been taken away. I felt frozen, caught between wanting to run and wanting to stay still, hoping maybe she'd disappear if I didn't move. The light from the hallway seemed to stretch and bend around her, making the whole room feel colder even though the heat was still on. I could hear the laughter from downstairs, but it felt far away now, like I was somewhere else. I quickly pulled my blanket up over my head, trying to hide from whatever it was. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. Tears started to roll down my cheeks, and I curled up as tight as I could, hoping sleep would come and take me away from that image. I cried quietly for a long time before finally drifting off. The next morning, I felt groggy and scared, but I tried to shake it off. I got up and went to find my sister in the kitchen. I asked her if anyone had visited the house last night, or if she had seen the old lady with the yellow hair and the purple dress. I said it like a question, even though I wasn't sure if she'd believe me. She looked at me like I was joking or maybe a little crazy. "No," she said, "no one came here." I told her what I had seen, describing the smile and the way she just stood there, staring. She just shrugged and said it was probably my guardian angel coming to watch over me while I slept. At the time, I wanted to believe her. Maybe it was a way to make me feel better, to explain the scary thing without making it worse. But even then, I thought it was a weird way for a guardian angel to say hello. Over the years, I tried to forget that night, but the image stuck with me. I didn't tell anyone else because I was afraid they'd laugh or think I was lying. One day, at school, I overheard a classmate talking about a strange experience he had. He said he saw a teenage boy standing in his backyard at night, just before closing his garage door. The boy wasn't moving, but what scared him most was the smile, just like the one I saw. Half his face was covered by a wide, almost impossible smile that stretched too far. The classmate said he ran back into the house, too scared to look again. I never asked more, but hearing that made me wonder if what I saw wasn't just a trick of my imagination. Thinking back now, years later, I realized that sometimes things happen that we can't explain but still feel real. It wasn't a ghost or some fantasy creature. It was something else, something that felt too strange and too unsettling to just be a dream. The light in the hallway, the way the shadows moved, and that smile, all of it felt like it belonged to another world, one just barely touching ours. I never saw that old lady again, but sometimes when the house is quiet and the hallway light is on, I find myself glancing toward it, wondering if she's still there, watching. It's like a warning or a reminder that some things don't need words to be understood. You just know when something is watching, even if it never moves or speaks. I learned that night that the world isn't always as safe as laughter in the kitchen or the warm blankets in your bed. Sometimes the things that watch you don't want to scare you. They just want you to know they're there. And when they smile like that, half their face stretching wide and impossible, it's not a smile you can forget. It's a smile that stays with you long after the light goes out. About 4 years ago, I woke up late one morning on a day off. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was the glowing red numbers on my bedroom alarm clock, 10:21. I remember the exact time because something strange happened later that day, and it stuck with me ever since. I lay there for a moment, still half asleep, feeling the warm sun filtering through the blinds. I wasn't in a rush since it was a day off and I didn't have any plans. After a few minutes, I got up, stretched, and went to the bathroom. The water from the tap was cold on my hands as I washed my face, try to wake myself up more. I brushed my teeth slowly, standing there, feeling the quiet hum of the house around me. I took my time because the whole day stretched out ahead, and I didn't want to rush. When I finished, I walked back to my bedroom, got dressed, and then grabbed my phone to check for messages or notifications. That's when I noticed something odd. The phone clock said 10:25. At first, I thought maybe I misread the alarm clock when I woke up, but I was sure I had looked at it when I first opened my eyes. I checked the alarm clock again, and it also said 10:25. I shrugged it off and figured maybe I had just been half asleep and confused about the time when I first woke up. I went downstairs to start my day properly. I switched on the PC in the corner of the living room. then turn on the TV to the news channel, wanting to listen while I cooked breakfast. I was still a bit groggy, but wanted something simple, so I planned to microwave some leftover rice from the night before. As I approached the microwave, the digital clock on it caught my eye. It read 10:25. I pulled out my phone again, double-checking. Still 10:25. My mind started to race. How could this be? I had just checked the clocks upstairs and now downstairs, and all of them showed the exact same time. There was no way I had done all of that. Walking downstairs, turning on the PC and TV, getting water, and starting to cook within 1 minute. I decided to stop what I was doing and focus on a microwave clock. I counted slowly in my head, watching the seconds pass by. Sure enough, after about 20 seconds, the microwave clock changed to 10:26, which made sense because the clock had probably been stuck at 10:25 for a while before I looked at it. I finished making my breakfast, plated it, and sat down on my PC like I usually do on a lazy day. Then I looked at the PC clock. It showed 10:20. Now I was really confused. I pulled out my phone to compare. It also said 10:20. I felt like I was caught in some kind of weird time loop. The clocks upstairs said one thing, downstairs another. I stared at the clock on the computer screen, watching the seconds tick by. The second hand moved smoothly, showing time passing as normal. 10:21, 10:22, 10:23 as I watched. But when I looked away and then looked back, the clock showed different times again. At one point, about 15 minutes into this strange experience, the cell phone and PC clocks jumped backward to 10:14. Later, they went to 10:13. Then, suddenly, back into the 10:20s. The clocks seemed to jump around, sometimes moving forward like normal, other times jumping back several minutes. I checked every clock in the house. The oven clock, the digital clock on the stereo, my watch, and even clocks on websites through the internet. They all acted weird. Some stayed at the same time for minutes on end. Others jumped backwards or forwards randomly. It was as if time inside my house was not moving in a straight line. I started to write everything down, trying to track the times, hoping to find some kind of pattern. I kept a careful log, noting every strange jump and the exact times the clocks displayed. Sometimes the clocks would stay frozen for minutes. Other times they sped ahead. The TV news clock, which should have been synced to live broadcast, went backwards by almost 5 minutes, then jumped back to the right time. I tried to think of logical reasons for what was happening. Maybe a power surge had messed up all the digital clocks. But that didn't explain why the PC, the internet, and even the TV clocks were out of sync. Those should be synchronized to official time servers or broadcasts. I tried unplugging and resetting some of the devices, but that didn't help. The clocks still behaved erratically once they turned back on. I felt like I was trapped in some sort of glitch in time. Every time I looked away from clock and then back, it was like I stepped into a different moment, sometimes minutes earlier, sometimes later. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that time itself couldn't just break or reverse, but my own senses were struggling to make sense of what was happening. To pass the time, I tried to distract myself. I ate my breakfast slowly, sipped on some water, and tried to watch the news on TV. The reporter's words sounded normal, but the timestamp on the screen kept flashing different times. It was impossible to know exactly when anything was happening. I checked the wall clock again. It showed 10:19, but the second hand was ticking forward. I watched for a few minutes, and it moved normally. Then I looked away and back again. This time it read 10:22. It was maddening. The clocks inside my house seemed to operate on different timelines, overlapping and intersecting at random. After about an hour or so of this strange experience, I noticed the clocks slowly started to behave normally again. The TV clock finally synced with the PC and my phone. The microwave and oven clocks matched the wall clock. Time began moving forward steadily, without jumping or freezing. By the end of that day, every clock in the house was back to normal, ticking as they should. I never figured out what caused it. There was no power outage, no storms, no strange noises or sensations other than the clocks themselves acting weird. The whole thing was unnerving and made me question how much I really understand about time and perception. Since that day, I've kept a close eye on my clocks and devices, but I've never seen anything like that happen again. It was like some momentary lapse in reality or a glitch in the system that runs the clocks around me. A reminder, maybe, that time is not as fixed or reliable as I thought. Now, whenever I look at a clock, I remember that strange morning. It's a quiet but unsettling memory of how time, which we all take for granted as steady and real, can suddenly feel fragile, broken, and unreliable. It wasn't a ghost story or a dream, just a simple day where time itself seemed to falter and lose its way in my own house. And that's what still scares me the most about it. That night at the fair started out feeling like any other summer evening. The park was alive with the buzz of the annual event. Lights flashing from the rides, the smell of popcorn and cotton candy hanging thick in the air, and the hum of people laughing and shouting, enjoying themselves. My two friends and I were 14, caught up in that mix of excitement and teenage bravado. The fair was always packed, but that year, we decided we wanted to be a little different, a little cooler than the crowd. Instead of staying close to the food stands and noisy rides, we wanted some space, some quiet. So we slipped away from the crowd and found ourselves at the start of this long walking trail that stretched away from the fairgrounds. The trail was a narrow path running alongside a creek at first, lined with thick trees that blocked most of the moonlight. The air was cooler here, filled with the earthy smell of wet leaves and dirt. The lights from the fair faded behind us, and the sounds became distant, muffled by the trees and hills. We walked in a line, our footsteps soft on the dirt and gravel, the occasional rustle of leaves and snapping of twigs the only sounds besides our quiet chatter. As we moved further down the trail, the path climbed a small hill, and we reached a place where the trail passed through a short tunnel. The tunnel was old, made of concrete, with graffiti smeared on the walls and bits of trash scattered around the edges. It wasn't a long tunnel, maybe just 10 feet, but it felt like it swallowed the light whole. We decided to sit at the mouth of the tunnel, just on the edge where the last street lamp's light faded and the dark of the hill crept in. The night was getting late, and the fair's noise was a dull roar far behind us. Up here, the world felt quieter, heavier somehow. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles, and the soft breeze moved the branches in a slow, steady rhythm. The three of us settled down, leaning against the concrete, trying to look like we were relaxed and cool, even though I was starting to feel a little nervous. The kind of nervous that creeps up quietly, not like fear, but more like an uneasy feeling you can't shake. Suddenly, out of the dark, a woman appeared. She was walking slowly up the hill toward us, carrying a small baby wrapped in a blanket. Her steps were steady, and her eyes had a tired, serious look. She stopped a few feet away and asked us if we knew a man who was sitting near a bench at the bottom of the hill. The way she asked was strange, quiet, but urgent, like she was worried. She said the man had been following us for a while and was watching us from down there. None of us knew the man, but hearing that someone was watching us sent a cold ripple through my chest. We didn't say much, just shook our heads. She looked at us for a long moment, then warned us to be careful. Without another word, she turned and walked back down the hill. The baby was quiet the whole time, just nestled in her arms. We sat there frozen for a minute, watching the dark shape of the hill where she had come from, trying to make sense of what she said. The bench she mentioned was just a small wooden seat beside the trail, half hidden by bushes and trees, where you could rest if you were hiking. I had passed it a few times before, but I had never seen anyone sitting there at night. We scanned the bottom of the hill, but saw no one. Then the feeling hit me again, stronger this time. That same feeling that someone was watching us. Not from a distance, but close enough that if we looked in the right direction, we might see a pair of eyes staring back. My friends didn't say anything, but I could tell they felt it too. Without talking about it, we all got up fast. The quiet, dark hill suddenly felt like a trap, like a place we shouldn't be. The tunnel, which had seemed cool and interesting just moments before, now looked like a dark mouth waiting to swallow us whole. We didn't want to stay there another second. We hurried down the hill, trying to stay close together. The path was uneven and slippery in places from the dampness, but we didn't care. The fair's lights were our goal. The sounds of people a beacon we all craved. The trees closed in around us as we descended, their long shadows reaching out like fingers, and every little noise, the snap of a twig, the rustle of a leaf, felt loud and threatening. My heart was pounding, every beat loud in my ears. We reached the bottom of the hill where the bench was supposed to be. The place was empty, just the bench half hidden by a bush, and the soft light from a lone street lamp nearby casting long shadows. The trail continued past it, curving away into darkness. For a moment, I thought maybe the woman was wrong, that maybe she had just seen a shadow or a trick of the light. But then I saw it, a figure standing just at the edge of the light, close enough that I could make out a shape, but not close enough to see a face. The figure was still watching. It didn't move or say anything. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, only that it was there, just waiting. Without thinking, we turned and ran. Not the slow, careful walk we had been doing, but full out running, the pounding of our feet echoing through the trees. The path was uneven, and I tripped once, my knees scraping against a rock, but I kept going. My friends were yelling my name, and I was yelling back, though my throat felt dry and raw. We didn't stop until the lights of the fair were close again, the noise loud and bright, washing away the quiet and the shadows. We didn't look back once. Once we were back among the crowds, safe and surrounded by people, the unease slowly started to fade. We told each other to forget about what happened, to just enjoy the rest of the night. But even as we laughed and rode the rides, a part of me stayed alert, scanning the dark corners and the edges of the crowd, wondering if the figure was still out there, waiting for someone. That night taught me that not all scary things shout or chase you down. Some just watch, quiet and still, and sometimes that's enough to freeze you in place and make you run like your life depends on it. The fair was supposed to be fun, but the trail, the hill, and that quiet figure reminded me how close the dark can be and how fast it can catch you if you let your guard down. After that, I never took that path again. I never wanted to see what else might be hiding in the shadows, waiting for someone to walk too far from the crowd. I was running my cable route deep in the city, going from building to building, trying to keep my head down and finish up before the next job. It was one of those days where everything felt like it was moving slow, but also fast at the same time. Traffic crawling, people everywhere, and the clock ticking like a metronome in the back of my mind. Between jobs, I started to realize something urgent. I needed to take a dump. Like right now, no time to mess around. The nearest quick trip, usually my go-to, was at least 5 miles away. But in the city, that's more like 3.5 light years. You never know how long it takes to get anywhere when the streets are clogged and drivers are aggressive. So I made a quick decision. I would gamble and hit the nearest gas station I could find. It was a risk, but honestly, I didn't have much choice. I pulled into the little corner gas station on a block that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. The place reeked of stale cigarette smoke and something sour I couldn't place. I wasn't exactly in the mood to notice the smell. I needed to get inside and find that bathroom. The line to the one and only unisex bathroom was already there when I walked in. A guy, a woman, and me. We all kind of stood around awkwardly, making small talk that I wasn't really paying attention to because, honestly, I was clenching so hard I was sure my insides were about to explode. I don't remember what the guy or the woman were saying exactly, but their voices sounded distant, like they were underwater. My focus was on the bathroom door, willing it to open up so I could get in and relieve myself. Time dragged. The bathroom line didn't move fast enough. The guy in front of me was calm at first, chatting like everything was normal. Then something changed. Out of nowhere, the guy's face twisted. His eyes went wild, like he saw something no one else could see. His mouth opened in this awful guttural scream that made my skin crawl. He started jerking his body violently, trying to rip the bathroom door open with all his might. It was like some nightmare scene playing out right in front of me. The sounds were not human. Demonic screeches, guttural and raw. The woman in the bathroom started yelling, terrified. The woman next to me froze, her face drained of color. I took a step forward, about to tell the guy to calm down. What the hell was going on when he suddenly dropped to the floor? His body convulsed violently, shaking uncontrollably. He was foaming at the mouth, his eyes rolling back, but then he snapped them open again, and I swear, I could see tears of blood running down his face. I barely caught him as he collapsed. I was frozen, staring into those eyes, the same eyes that had been full of life just moments ago, now wild, desperate, and in pain. I had no idea what to do, but I could tell this was serious. The woman inside the bathroom came out, an elderly lady with kind eyes, who immediately took charge. She said she was a retired nurse. She moved quickly, instructing us what to do. She told me to clear the area so he had room to breathe and made sure his head was turned to the side so he wouldn't choke. I did everything she said, feeling useless but trying my best to help. Paramedics showed up not long after, and by then the man's body was still jerking but less violently. I stayed back, watching the whole thing, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle deep inside me. It was heavy, like a stone in my chest. Later, I found out from the man's wife that his alcoholism was linked to epilepsy, a dangerous combination he tried to hide. Apparently, he was waiting in line to sneak a swig from a flask hidden in his coat pocket. It made sense why he'd be so nervous. The dude had been polite, well-dressed, and clean. You'd never guess what he was dealing with underneath. After the paramedics took him away, the elderly woman declined to use the bathroom. She looked shaken, and honestly, so did I. I finally got in, and I dropped the biggest, most satisfying dump of my life in that dingy, grimy bathroom. The smell was awful, but in that moment, it felt like pure relief. It's not exactly a horror story with ghosts or monsters, but seizures scare the absolute hell out of me. Seeing a man go from casual conversation to a violent seizure, crying blood and foaming at the mouth, it shook me to the core. It made me realize how much people hide behind a calm face, how much pain and struggle someone can carry without us ever knowing. And sometimes, life throws you into these moments without warning, and all you can do is try to help and hope you don't forget what you saw. That day, the route delay sucked, but it put me right where I needed to be, in the wrong place at the right time. And it left me thinking, sometimes people's personal lives are way too heavy to carry alone. I walked away from that gas station with a new respect for the fragility of life and for the invisible battles people fight every single day. It was around last year when everything happened, and honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. It started with Kevin, a guy who lived on campus, but who I didn't really know that well. We had some mutual friends, but I was never close to him. He lived in one of those big dorm buildings near the edge of the campus, the part that borders the mountain. He wasn't someone who hung out with my circle, so when he disappeared, I didn't even notice for a few days. The university is kind of split between the flat part where most of the buildings and classrooms are and the mountainside, which feels pretty wild. There's a spring at the far end of campus, near the mountain's base. It's a quiet place covered with trees, and most people stay away from it. Sometimes students sneak out there to party or hang out, but it's not a popular spot. The path to the spring is a dirt trail, overgrown in parts, and it's not well lit or maintained. It's the kind of place that feels a little creepy if you're alone after dark. The whole thing started when my housemates showed me a post on the university's official Facebook page. The page isn't usually a source of bad news, mostly campus events, reminders, things like that. But that night, the post was different. It was a short notice from campus security about 2 bodies found in the spring near the mountain. The post didn't say much, just a warning for students to stay clear of the area. No names, no details about who the bodies were or how they got there. That's when the worry started for us. At first, I didn't connect it to Kevin, but then someone in our group remembered that Kevin had been missing for almost a week. We hadn't really talked about it because, like I said, we weren't close and no one really knew the details. But now, the pieces started falling together in a way that made me feel sick. It wasn't until later that night, when I looked more closely at the post and the comments, that I saw people mentioning a name that sounded like Kevin's. The report misspelled his last name, but the first name and the dorm he lived in made it clear it was him. The panic set in fast. It hit me and everyone in my house hard. I didn't sleep that night. I was glued to my phone, refreshing the university's news page, waiting for any updates. My housemates and I decided to go meet with some of Kevin's dorm mates. We wanted to see if anyone knew more or if there was something we could do. The dorm was quiet and tense. People were scared but also in shock. Kevin was one of them. It didn't feel real. At the same time, I called a couple of friends who had gone straight to the spring after the news broke. They told me the police were already there, and the bodies had been taken away for autopsy. There was nothing to see anymore, just the quiet, dark water and the cold night air hanging heavy over the place. They described the scene to me, the muddy banks, the scattered leaves, the stillness that seemed out of place. The official reports came the next day. The university and local police confirmed it was Kevin and another student found in the spring. Both of them had drowned. The weekend before, they had apparently gone swimming there, which is something that happens sometimes, a place for students to cool off or just fool around. But something had gone terribly wrong. When their bodies were found, they were swollen and bloated from being in the water for so long. Crustaceans and other small animals had started feeding on the skin, making the bodies look raw and damaged. At first glance, the marks on their skin looked like lash marks or bruises. That made people think of a fraternity initiation gone wrong, or some kind of hazing accident. But the police investigation ruled out foul play in terms of violence. It was just the way the bodies looked after days underwater, the natural effects of decomposition mixed with the environment. The whole thing was heartbreaking and disturbing. Kevin was just 20 years old, a student trying to live his life like the rest of us. Nobody really knew what had happened that day. Maybe they went swimming and got caught in a current or slipped underwater. Maybe they panicked. Maybe the water was colder than they expected and they lost strength. The mountain spring isn't a safe place to swim. It's deep, with rocky edges and hidden currents. In the days after the news broke, the campus felt different. People were quieter. The spring was blocked off by police tape, and students stayed away from the mountain edge. There was a heavy sadness that lingered in the air, especially in the dorm where Kevin lived. People kept looking at their phones, hoping for updates or answers that never came. I kept thinking about Kevin and the other student, who had also died with him, a guy nobody seemed to know much about either. It felt unfair, like their lives were just lost and forgotten in a place nobody really cared about until it was too late. The fact that the bodies had been there for days without anyone noticing made it feel even worse. How could someone just disappear like that, and no one would look for them until it was already a tragedy? The autopsy reports were clear. Drowning, no signs of struggle, no alcohol or drugs in their system strong enough to explain what happened. The university said they were reviewing safety measures around the mountain and the spring, but the damage was done. The place felt haunted not by ghosts, but by the weight of what had happened there. I remember walking past the blocked-off trail to the spring a few days after the discovery. The police tape flapped in the wind, and the ground was still damp from rain. There was a smell in the air, a mix of wet earth and something bitter that I couldn't place. I stood there for a while, thinking about Kevin and the other student, imagining their last moments. I thought about how quickly things could go wrong and how fragile life is. There was no clear answer, no closure for anyone. Just a terrible accident that left two families grieving and a campus shaken. Kevin's dorm mates started organizing small memorials, leaving flowers and notes at the dorm entrance. My housemates and I talked about it more after that, sharing what little we knew, realizing how little any of us actually knew about the people around us. In the end, Kevin's death was a harsh reminder of how dangerous even familiar places can be. It made me think about how we take so much for granted. The safety of the campus, the people we pass every day. You never really know what's going on beneath the surface, both in the water and in the lives of others. The spring is still there, just as quiet and hidden as before, but now it carries a heavy story. Kevin and the other student didn't just drown in that water. Their deaths left a mark on the campus, a painful scar that no one can erase. And that's something that stays with you, long after the police have packed up and the university moves on to the next crisis. Rest in peace, Kevin. The sun had just started to dip below the horizon when I left the main road and turned onto the gravel path that led deep into the woods. The air was cool, the kind of chill that made your skin tighten just a little, but it wasn't cold enough for a jacket yet. I had come out here on a whim, a spur-of-the-moment decision to get away from the noise of the city. I needed quiet. I needed the kind of silence only the forest could give. The car rattled over the rough path, the gravel crunching under the tires. Trees crowded in on both sides, their branches almost meeting above the road to form a kind of tunnel. It felt like I was leaving the world behind. I'd done this kind of drive before, out to a favorite spot I found years ago. But this time I didn't plan to just stay for a few hours. I was going to camp, alone. I'd never really done solo camping before, but it seemed simple enough. I packed light, a small tent, a sleeping bag, a little stove, and enough food and water for 2 days. I didn't bring much else. No fancy gear, no big backpacks, just the basics. I wanted to test myself to feel what it was like to be alone out here. After about 15 minutes, the gravel path ended at a small clearing I'd spotted on a map. The spot wasn't marked or maintained. It was just a quiet patch surrounded by tall pines and thick underbrush. Perfect. I pulled the car in and got out. The forest smelled sharp and fresh. Pine needles covered the ground, and small insects buzzed around the undergrowth. I started setting up my tent right at the edge of the clearing, near a big rock that looked like it could serve as a chair. The sky was turning a deep orange, then pink, then a dark blue with the first stars appearing. As I worked, I noticed how quickly the light was changing. In the city, twilight seemed to last forever. Out here, it slipped away fast. Once the tent was up, I gathered some dry branches and sticks for a fire. I didn't want to spend the night in total darkness. The fire gave me something to focus on. Lighting the matches, coaxing the flame to catch, the smell of smoke mixing with pine sap. It felt good. I sat on the rock, warming my hands and staring into the flames. The forest was alive with sound. Crickets chirped, birds settled in their nests, and somewhere far off, a woodpecker drummed on a tree. It was peaceful in a way I didn't expect. I breathed in deeply, feeling the tension from the city seep out of my muscles. After a while, I cooked a simple meal over the fire, a can of beans heated in a small pot, and some bread I brought along. The food tasted better than anything I'd eaten all week. I thought about how easy it was to get caught up in the rush of life and forget the quiet things. How rare it was to just sit and watch a fire without distractions. The night deepened. I lay back on a blanket I brought, looking up at the sky. The stars were bright and countless, stretching from one horizon to the other. No streetlights, no buildings, no city glow to dull their shine. I felt small and peaceful, but then something shifted. I don't know exactly when I first heard it. Maybe it was the quiet that made it stand out, or maybe it had been there all along. At first, it was just a faint sound, almost like a soft tapping, coming from the woods beyond the clearing. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer stepping on dry branches, or a bird settling in. I tried to ignore it, but the sound didn't stop. It came again, rhythmic, steady, slow, tap, tap, tap. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there. It wasn't the rustling of leaves or the snapping of twigs underfoot. It sounded deliberate, like someone or something was moving carefully, trying not to be noticed. I sat up, heart beating a little faster. I scanned the dark tree line with my flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, but showed nothing but trunks and leaves. I reminded myself I was alone and that sounds out here were normal, even at night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My skin prickled and my eyes darted around the clearing. The fire flickered in the breeze, casting long shadows. The tap, tap, tap continued. I tried to stay calm, but every nerve in my body was alert. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly got up, shining the light in all directions. The beam caught a flash of movement just on the edge of the woods, but when I looked closer, it was just a small rabbit darting away. I laughed quietly at myself. "Get a grip," I whispered, but the tapping didn't stop. It seemed to come closer, then retreat, then closer again. I moved the flashlight toward the sound, but all I saw were trees, rocks, and the uneven forest floor. I called out softly, but no one answered. No voices, no footsteps, just that persistent tapping. The night air grew colder. I put on my jacket and sat back down by the fire, trying to ignore the noise. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, maybe a woodpecker or some other animal with a habit of pecking at trees. But then I noticed something else. The tapping wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from the ground. My eyes widened. I pointed the flashlight at the base of a tree and saw something I hadn't noticed before. Small, fresh footprints in the dirt. Not animal tracks. Human footprints. Barefoot. They were small. Maybe a child's. I froze. The footprints led from the edge of the woods toward my clearing. My mind raced. How had someone gotten this close without me hearing them approach? And why would they be out here barefoot in the middle of the night? I grabbed my phone, hoping for a signal to call someone, but there was none. Not even a single bar. The woods were too thick, the area too remote. I felt exposed, alone, vulnerable. The fire flickered low, and I realized I hadn't brought a weapon or anything to protect myself. Just a small pocket knife that wouldn't do much if trouble came. The footprints stopped just short of my tent, like whoever was out here had paused, watching. I sat very still, listening. The tapping stopped. A silence deeper than before settled over the clearing. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, makes you aware of every breath you take. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the silence, a soft rustling, coming from the other side of the clearing, near the car. I grabbed the flashlight again and aimed it toward the sound. My hand shook slightly. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on a figure crouched by the car. I gasped quietly and stood up, shining the light directly on the person. It was a man. His clothes were dirty, torn, and his face was shadowed under a hood. His eyes caught the light and reflected back at me. He didn't move or speak. My heart pounded. I stepped back slowly, searching for a way to protect myself. My hand brushed against the pocket knife in my jacket. It felt useless. The man stood up slowly and turned toward the woods, disappearing into the shadows. I wanted to call after him, but my voice was gone. I was frozen, heart racing, not sure if I should follow or stay put. The woods felt alive now, full of unseen eyes and silent threats. I decided to get in the car and drive back the way I came. I wasn't about to stay out here with someone lurking in the dark. I packed up the tent quickly, shaking, barely able to keep my hands steady. The fire was out by the time I climbed into the car, and the forest was quiet again. The gravel crunched under the tires as I drove away, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man chasing after me. The road was narrow and winding, but I kept my speed steady, not daring to look away. When I finally reached the main road, the streetlights and distant hum of traffic felt like a relief. I breathed deeply, the city noise washing over me. Later, I learned there had been reports of a missing man in the area, someone who had been living rough in the woods and had been spotted by hunters a few days earlier. I never went back to that spot. The silence of the forest wasn't the kind of quiet I wanted to be around again. The memory of those barefoot footprints and the man's dark eyes stayed with me. A reminder that sometimes being alone isn't safe at all. But at least I left alive, and that night taught me to never underestimate how real danger can be. No ghosts, no monsters, just the cold, hard truth of someone else out there, waiting in the dark. There are some wonderful things about being young, poor, and in love. Sadly, this is not about any of those things. When I was 22, I decided to move in with my boyfriend. We were both broke, like really broke, but somehow managed to afford a tiny apartment in a college town. It was nothing fancy, one bedroom on the first floor of a rundown complex, but it was ours. The paint on the walls was peeling in thick layers, a nasty old lead-based stuff that looked like it had been there since the building was built. It was so thick, we joked we could probably survive a nuclear attack under all that paint. The bathroom was small, with no vent fan, only a window that opened right into the shower, which was strange, but we didn't care. The appliances were ancient, probably handed down through generations, rusty and barely working, but we didn't care. It was our little place. My boyfriend worked nights, the graveyard shift, and I worked days, so we didn't see much of each other during the week. We made the most of the time we did have, usually just enjoying the quiet company of one another. Sometimes we just lie around naked, talking or holding each other. Life was simple, even if it wasn't easy. One strange thing I started noticing early on was this log, just a thick, rough piece of wood, standing upright right outside the bathroom window. At first, I thought maybe my boyfriend was using it for something, like as a step or a way to peek inside. He denied it, said it wasn't his, and every time I went outside to move it, it would mysteriously be back in the same spot within days. The apartment complex had yard workers who came several times a week, so I figured maybe they put it there or moved it back out of the way. It seemed harmless enough. Winter came, and with it the yard workers finally cleared out all the debris in the front yard, including the log. We felt a little peace in the cold months, wrapped up in blankets and warm clothes, trying to ignore the drafty windows and old pipes that rattled all night. When our lease was up, we jumped at the chance to move into a bigger, two-bedroom apartment in the same complex for less money. It was an amazing deal, but the location was a serious step down. Instead of a quiet street lined with houses, our new place faced a dark alley behind an abandoned strip mall. There was an empty Chinese buffet nearby, long closed, where stray cats roamed freely. Trash bins lined the alley, and street lamps flickered weakly after dark, leaving most of the area in near-complete darkness. Still, the apartment was huge and cheap, and for a while, it felt like a fresh start. We were young and full of hope. My boyfriend even bought me a ring for Valentine's Day, though that happiness quickly soured when we realized the rings were the wrong size. Mine was made for a huge hand, like size 12 instead of my tiny 4. He kept the rings in his car's glove box to take back for resizing, but a snowstorm kept him from returning them immediately. When he finally went out the next day, his car had been broken into. The rings were gone, but nothing else was touched. We had no money to replace them, and every pawn shop we checked swore they hadn't seen anything like it. I couldn't help but imagine some woman with big hands now wearing my ring, and it ate away at me more than I wanted to admit. Summer rolled around, but the heat brought no relief. We lost our phone service because we couldn't pay the bill, but honestly, we only ever talked to each other anyway. Police stations in our neighborhood closed or had reduced forces, so when something happened, there was no one to turn to. The daylight made the area seem less scary, but the nights felt heavy with unease. One night, after my boyfriend went to bed early, I decided to take a long soak in the bathtub to unwind. I ran the water, adding bath salts and bubbles, then opened the bathroom window for a little fresh air. I left my clothes in a messy pile by the bathroom door and brought my laptop to watch movies while I soaked. The warm water felt good, and I lost myself in the flickering light of the screen and the sound of the bubbles. Hours passed. I don't know exactly how long, but I remember the water had cooled by the time I drained it. I stood up, stretching, feeling the cool night air through the open window on my wet skin. I stepped carefully around the clothes on the floor, barely paying attention to the open bathroom door as I made my way out. That's when I saw him. A man was outside the bathroom window. At first, I thought it was my boyfriend playing a joke like he used to at our old place. But then I saw his eyes, the way they didn't match my boyfriend's. They were cold, too high up in the window frame for someone standing on the ground. He was standing on something, a log, just like before, so tall that his whole torso was visible in the window. He was naked, jerking off, watching me in the bathroom. I was frozen. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. I could only stare. The motion of his hand caught my eye. That's when I saw the ring on his finger. Silver with Celtic knotwork. The same kind of ring I'd lost months before. The shock hit me all at once. This wasn't a stranger. This was the man who stole my ring. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I scrambled away from the window and ran into the bedroom, grabbing a blanket and wrapping myself up. My voice trembled as I told my boyfriend, barely able to get the words out. He was groggy and confused, but jumped up to check. By the time he looked outside, the man was gone. All that was left was the log, standing upright outside the bathroom window. We filed a police report the next day, but without a phone, we had to drive 20 minutes to the station. They listened, but told us there wasn't much they could do with limited resources and no evidence. Our neighborhood was known for problems, and we weren't surprised by the response. We couldn't afford to break our lease or move somewhere safer, so we stayed, locked in a cage of fear. I covered every window with black contact paper and wedge boards into every frame to keep them shut. The bathroom window never opened again. I carried pepper spray everywhere, never left after dark, and jumped at every noise outside. Most nights, I'd hear faint sounds near the bedroom window, the one next to the bathroom. My boyfriend would check in the morning and find footprints in the dirt, fresh impressions that proved someone had been standing there, watching us. For 3 years, I lived like this, constantly afraid, always alert, never feeling safe in my own home. The man never came inside, never spoke, never threatened in words, just his presence, hovering like a dark cloud. It was a slow, creeping terror that wore me down. Eventually, we moved out, not because things got better, but because I couldn't take it anymore. We saved every penny to get to a safer place, far away from that alley, those shadows, and the man who stood outside my window. Even now, years later, I still can't sleep without double-checking the locks. I still wake up to the sound of footsteps outside, even when there's no one there. That man changed how I saw the world, made me understand just how real fear can be when it's silent and watching. Some nights, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't caught him. How many times he'd been there, hiding in the dark while I showered or slept. That log, standing tall like a step, was his way in. And I was lucky to be alive. The terror wasn't in some ghost story or myth. It was in a living, breathing person who took my broken ring, used the shadows to creep closer, and turn my life into a prison. That's what being young, poor, and in love looked like for me. And it still haunts me. A few years ago, I was part of the county volunteer search and rescue team. We were trained to respond to all kinds of emergencies. Lost hikers, natural disasters, accidents, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that day. It's one of those moments that stays with you forever, something you carry with you in a way that changes you. I still think about it, even now. We got the call early one morning, before the sun was fully up. The dispatcher was tight-lipped, just telling us that a small plane had crashed in the hills near a neighboring town. They didn't know if there were any survivors, but the weather had been rough the night before, so the chances weren't looking good. I remember the way the words sounded over the radio, short, clipped, like everyone already knew what we were facing but still had to say it out loud. When I arrived at the staging area, a clearing near the edge of the woods where emergency vehicles were parked, the mood was already heavy. The sheriff was there, and I caught him looking at the ground, his face tight with something like dread or exhaustion. Someone whispered that the people on the plane were an elderly couple and their young granddaughter. I could feel the air around us grow thick. The kind of silence that falls when people don't want to believe what they've been told, but also can't deny it. The sheriff didn't have to say more. The moment those details came out, the energy in the group shifted. It wasn't just another crash. It was a family, a little girl. The thought of that, such a small, fragile life caught up in something so violent, made my chest tighten. I saw the same look in the faces of other responders. Some of the guys shifted their weight uneasily or rubbed their eyes like they were trying to clear the fog that had settled over their minds. We gathered our gear, ropes, radios, stretchers, and headed out toward the crash site. The terrain was rough, a steep hillside covered with broken trees, tangled branches, and thick underbrush. The wind was cold and sharp, cutting through the layers of clothing I was wearing. It made my skin prickle in a way that didn't feel natural, like the world itself was on edge. As we moved closer, the devastation became clear. The wreckage was scattered across a wide area, twisted metal and shattered glass mixed with broken pieces of the aircraft. The ground was churned up from the impact, deep gouges where the plane had hit, and bits of personal belongings scattered around. Clothes, shoes, fragments of luggage. The smell hit me next, a bitter mix of fuel, smoke, and something else that I can only describe as the metallic tang of death. Our lead, a calm and steady man with years of experience, gathered us, and spoke quietly but firmly. He said that if anyone felt they couldn't handle the recovery part, it was okay to step back. No one would judge or hold it against them. It was one of those moments where the line between strength and vulnerability was thin, and admitting weakness wasn't easy. Almost half the team chose not to go any further. They helped set up safety lines and manage communication with teams spread out across the hillside, but they stepped aside for the hardest part. I stayed with the group that went down to the site where we expected to find the bodies. The climb down was slow and careful, using ropes and harnesses to navigate the worst sections. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the weight of what we were about to see was pressing down on my soul. When we reached the wreckage, the first thing that caught my eye was a small stuffed teddy bear. It lay on the ground, soaked in blood, its soft fur matted and torn. Something about that image stopped me cold. The innocence of a child's toy covered in something so final. I knelt down, barely able to breathe, and reached out to touch it. The fabric was sticky, wet with blood, and I had to force myself not to look away. We found the bodies not far from the bear. The plane's fuselage was crushed and burned, and the bodies were pinned under twisted metal and broken branches. The sight was beyond words. 3 lives shattered, silent forever. The little girl was there, her eyes wide open but empty, staring up at the sky as if she never even knew what had happened. It was the kind of look that stays with you long after you close your eyes. I had seen awful things before. As an EMT and a volunteer in search and rescue, I dealt with car crashes, overdoses, even suicides. But this was different. This was a family, a child who never got a chance. The finality of it crushed something inside me. Something I didn't know was still vulnerable. We worked quietly, carefully, moving the bodies onto stretchers so we could bring them back up the hill. No one spoke much. Everyone was lost in their own thoughts. I remember the cold, the silence, the way the light filtered through the trees and seemed almost too bright for the place where life had ended. Back at the top, we handed the bodies over to the coroner and took a moment to breathe, to try to shake off the numbness. But it clung to me like a shadow. For days afterward, I felt disconnected from everything. It was like I was moving through life behind a glass wall, watching but not really part of it. I don't think people understand what that kind of experience does to you. It's not just about the horror or the sadness. It's the way it breaks something inside, something you didn't know you had until it was gone. I kept replaying the image of that little girl's eyes, empty and lifeless. The teddy bear, stained red. The finality of it all. Still, I knew why I had to do it. If I didn't stand up and go down that hill, someone else would have to. Someone else would have to carry that weight, that numbness, that heartbreak. And I couldn't let that be them. I wanted to protect my teammates, my friends, from feeling that same emptiness. I've thought a lot about what it means to be part of search and rescue since then. It's not just about saving lives or finding people. Sometimes it's about being there for the moments no one wants to see, facing the darkest parts of life head on, so others don't have to. It's about carrying the pain so others don't have to carry alone. That crash changed me. It taught me the limits of what I can endure, but also the strength it takes to keep going. I learned that sometimes being brave isn't about fighting or rushing in. It's about standing still, accepting the hard truths, and doing the job anyway, no matter how much it breaks you. I don't talk about that day often, not because I want to forget, but because the weight of it is heavy. I carry it quietly inside, a reminder of the fragility of life and the cost of bearing witness to its end. And every time I see a child's toy or hear a story about a family lost too soon, that numbness comes back for a moment. But I keep moving forward, because that's what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself, to face the worst and still show up, ready to do whatever it takes. No fairy tales, no miracles, just the hard, painful truth of life, death, and the people who answer the call when no one else can. I remember the house where we lived with my grandparents like it was yesterday. It was a big, old 2-story place with creaky wooden floors and thick, heavy curtains that never really let in the full sunlight. The kind of house where even the quietest sound echoes, and the shadows seem to stretch longer than they should. My aunt's room was at the end of the hallway on the second floor, right next to the stairs. It was one of those rooms that felt a little colder, even on warm days. In that room stood a lamp unlike any I'd ever seen. It was a Victorian-style doll, about 2 feet tall, dressed in an old-fashioned lace dress that looked like it belonged in a museum. The doll's face was painted with a pale complexion, bright red lips, and eyes that never seemed to blink, always staring with a fixed, lifeless gaze. The kind of eyes that catch the corner of your vision and make your stomach twist when you turn your head to look directly. The doll was on a nightstand next to my aunt's bed, always facing the door like it was waiting for someone to come in. What made it creepier was the way it worked as a lamp. There was no switch anywhere obvious. To turn the light on, you had to hold the doll's cold plastic hand and move its arm up and down. The doll's arm was jointed so it could swing like a real arm, but the lamp wouldn't light up any other way. That meant whoever turned it on had to touch it, and I never knew anyone who wanted to do that willingly. I was a scaredy cat growing up. I didn't like the dark, and I didn't like things that seemed just a little off. But that doll lamp, it was on a whole other level. I avoided going into my aunt's room unless I had to, and when I did, I made sure to keep my eyes on the floor and move fast. One afternoon, I found myself home alone. My grandparents had gone out to run errands, and my aunt was at school. The house was quiet in that strange way it gets when no one is around. No TV noise, no talking, just the ticking of the old clock in the living room and the occasional creak from the settling house. I needed a blanket from my aunt's closet because it was chilly, and I thought maybe wrapping up would make me feel safer. I knew the lamp was there, and I didn't want to mess with it, but I convinced myself I could get the blanket without any trouble. Luckily, 2 things made me feel a little better about going into that room. First, it was the middle of the afternoon, so I didn't need the lamp's light. Second, the closet was right next to the door, so I could just grab the blanket quickly and get out. No reason to look around or linger. I stood outside the door, staring straight at the floor, avoiding the doll's gaze. I pushed the door open slowly, stepped inside without raising my head, and turned around 180 degrees so my back faced the doll. I wanted to be sure I wasn't looking at it. I swung open the closet door quickly and reached down for the blanket. It was folded on the bottom shelf, soft and warm. I grabbed it and started to turn back, ready to leave when something shifted in the room. The air felt different, heavier, like the whole space got brighter all at once. The peach fuzz on the back of my neck stood up, and a chill ran down my spine, even though the room wasn't cold. I froze. My heart hammered hard, loud enough I was sure it echoed in my ears. I wanted to run, scream, do anything to get out, but I was rooted to the spot. The instinct to survive, to get the hell away, bubbled up inside me like a volcano ready to explode. But before I could move, I had to see what was wrong. I slowly turned my head back toward the doll. The thing that I saw burned itself into my brain so deeply that even now, years later, I can close my eyes and see it clearly. The doll's arm was raised. Its cold plastic hand was held high, like someone had just grabbed it and lifted it up, pointing directly at me. The lamp was on. No one else had been in the house. No one had touched that doll but me, and I hadn't moved it. At least, I was sure I hadn't. My body was shaking, my breath caught in my throat. I took a step back, then another, never breaking eye contact with that hand. It didn't lower. It stayed pointed at me, accusing me in a way I couldn't explain. The room felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. My skin prickled, goosebumps covering every inch. The light from a lamp was soft but harsh, casting the doll's face in sharp relief and making the eyes seem even darker. That smile, that frozen, creepy smile, looked like it was mocking me. I didn't wait for anything else to happen. I spun around and bolted out of the room. Blanket forgotten, my heart pounding so loud I thought someone outside would hear it. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the doorknob. For the next hour, I stayed downstairs in the living room, sitting under a thick blanket, listening to the house creak and groan like it was alive. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that maybe I had moved the doll's arm by accident without realizing it. But the cold feeling in my chest told me otherwise. When my grandparents came home, I didn't say a word about what happened. I never wanted to seem crazy. The doll lamp stayed in my aunt's room, always watching, always waiting. I never went back in there alone. Years passed, but that afternoon stuck with me. Every time I think about it, I remember how real that fear felt. The cold hand, the pointed arm, the smile that didn't change. I never tried to touch the doll again. I know it sounds strange. It's just a doll with a lamp, right? But the way it moved, the way it lit up when no one touched it, that was something I can't explain. It felt like the doll knew I was there and wanted me to see it. I learned that some things don't need to be ghosts or monsters to be scary. Sometimes the scariest thing is something so ordinary, sitting right there in plain sight, waiting quietly to remind you that some things just don't belong to the world you know. That doll wasn't alive, but it made me feel like it was watching, judging, and maybe even warning me. I'm still careful when I walk past that room. I never look at the nightstand, and I never, ever go in without someone else around. Because some fears don't fade with time, they just get buried deeper, waiting for the moment they can reach out and grab you again. One night, when I was 13 years old, something happened that I have never been able to forget. It was the night I got my period for the first time. I had been expecting it for a while, nervous and confused about what it meant. My mom had told me what to expect, but no amount of talking or reading could prepare me for how I actually felt that night. I remember feeling strange, restless, and oddly heavy. That night, I ended up falling asleep on my back, which was very unusual for me. I had always been a side sleeper. Curling up on one side was how I found comfort and calm. But this night, I was flat on my back, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm my mind. I don't remember falling asleep exactly, but I do remember the dream I had. In the dream, I was sitting on a wooden chair, the kind with 4 legs and a flat backrest. I leaned the chair back on its 2 back legs and felt it start to tilt. At first, it was slow, just a little wobble, but then it started to lean further and further back. I felt myself slipping off the seat, and there was this strange sense of falling, like drifting into an endless void, something cold and empty stretching on forever. It was terrifying but quiet, like floating in space or sinking deep underwater where no sound reaches. The feeling of endless falling overwhelmed me with dread. Then I woke up suddenly, my heart racing. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't alone. Right above my face, just inches from my skin, was a figure. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My body felt heavy, like it was glued to the bed. The figure leaned over me, but it wasn't a person like anyone I had ever seen. It had a hooded white face, smooth and flat, like a mask, almost oval-shaped but a little elongated. It wasn't quite round, not quite egg-shaped, just a thin, pale oval that looked two-dimensional, as if it had been cut from paper and held in front of me. Its eyes were big, glassy, and oval, shining with a cold, cruel light. There were no pupils or irises, just the glossy surface reflecting the dim light of my room. It had thin lips, pressed tight together, trembling with what I can only describe as pure hatred. The lips were crooked, almost angry, quivering as if it was furious. There were 2 small holes where a nose should have been, but no nose to speak of. Above the eyes were thin, sharply arched eyebrows raised high on the forehead, like a permanent expression of disgust or rage. The face was humanoid, but completely alien. It had no hair, no texture, no color variation, just a pale, flat white, like a porcelain doll or a death mask. It was so close that I could see every detail, every quiver of the lips, every twitch of the brows. I could feel something burning through me, an unworldly hate so strong it felt like it was searing my skin, burning through to my very soul. It wasn't just fear, it was a deep, overwhelming sense of helplessness. I didn't just feel like my life was at risk. I felt like something much worse was on the line. It was as if this thing wanted to devour not just my body, but my very essence, my soul, forever. I tried to move. I tried to scream. I tried to breathe more than a shallow gasp. But nothing worked. My body was frozen. The paralysis was complete, like I was trapped inside my own skin. My mind was screaming to wake up, to run, to hide, but my limbs wouldn't obey. The only sound I managed was the tiniest whimper, a soft, pitiful sound barely escaping my throat. The moment I made that noise, the figure straightened up. It didn't vanish or retreat, but stood up tall and turned, pacing slowly at the foot of my bed. Its eyes never left me. It was still looking straight at me, its hateful gaze never wavering. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, like a storm was about to break. The figure's pacing was slow and deliberate, like a tiger trapped behind glass, desperate to reach its prey, but stopped by an invisible barrier. The frustration radiated from it, a tangible force pressing down on me, making it even harder to breathe. The figure was very tall, almost reaching the ceiling, but incredibly thin. It wore a long black cloak that draped over its entire body, swallowing any shape or form beneath it. The cloak moved softly as it paced, but the face was always clear, unmoving, relentless, impossible to ignore. After a while, I realized it hadn't been floating over me as I first thought. It was standing at the foot of my bed, leaning forward, bending down to hover its terrible face right above mine. The closer I looked, the more terrifying it became. It was impossible to tear my eyes away. I was still frozen, sitting up in bed as much as my body would allow, unable to move or even blink. Behind the figure, I noticed my closet door was slightly cracked open, just enough to see a sliver of darkness beyond. The creature moved silently toward the closet, slipping inside without breaking eye contact. It peered out from behind the door, still watching me, still trembling with rage and frustration. Time passed, or maybe it didn't. I don't really know how long it stayed there. It felt like hours, or maybe just minutes stretched out like forever. Eventually, the figure began to fade, dissolving slowly into the darkness, like smoke being blown away by a gentle wind. But the feeling of hate, the heavy weight in the room, stayed with me even as it vanished. I flipped on my bedroom light and left it on all night. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I stayed sitting on the couch in the living room, surrounded by the glow of every lamp and television I could find, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare, that it wasn't real. I didn't dare go back into my room, and the closet door stayed shut for weeks. For years, I told myself it was sleep paralysis. It was a common enough experience. People talked about seeing shapes, hearing voices, feeling unable to move while waking up or falling asleep. It made sense. My mind must have made it all up. The dream of falling, the face above me, the paralysis, it all fit the pattern of sleep paralysis. It was the logical explanation. I clung to it because it helped me feel safe again, like it was just a trick of my brain. Then, much later, I met someone who changed everything. We became friends, and one night, she shared her own experience, something that sounded just like mine. She told me about a night when she was alone, her bedroom door open. She was awake late, and out in her living room near the kitchen, she saw a figure. At first, she thought she was imagining things, but the figure stayed there, watching, waiting. It beckoned her to come closer. When she looked again, it was still there, unmoving but watching her with the same cold hate. When she described the figure, it was exactly like the one I'd seen. Same white oval face, same glassy eyes, same thin lips and angry eyebrows. We each got a sketchbook and drew what we had seen. When I looked at her drawing, I was stunned. I was looking at the same face that had hovered over mine all those years ago. It was impossible. We had never talked about these experiences before, never shared details. Yet we had seen the same thing. The fact that this thing appeared to both of us, separately, in different places and times, made me realize that it wasn't just a hallucination or sleep paralysis. Something else was real. Something terrifying. It was not a ghost or a fairy tale monster, but something far more disturbing because it felt so grounded in hate and darkness. We never saw it again, but the memory never left us. The weight of that face, the silence, the hate, it stayed with me every time I closed my eyes. I learned to keep my closet door shut, to keep the lights on, and to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, even if I can't explain it. That night, when I was 13, I didn't just see a nightmare. I came face to face with something I can't fully understand, something that still lingers at the edge of my thoughts. The paralysis wasn't just my body, it was a warning. And even now, I'm still not sure what it was trying to take from me, or if it ever stopped watching. When I was about 13 or 14, I lived on a farm in North Carolina that was nothing like the usual kind of farm people picture. This wasn't a place with rows of corn or beans. It was a pine tree farm, or more precisely, a pine straw harvesting operation. Pine needles, or pine straw, are used a lot in landscaping. So every year we'd go out and bale up the pine needles that had fallen. We lived right in the middle of the forest, surrounded by longleaf pines spread out across 550 acres of land. The house itself was strange. It wasn't built like a typical farmhouse, but instead was a weird custom design made by a dentist back in the 1930s. One of the biggest features was the living room, which had a massive picture window that stretched almost the entire length of the room, about 50 feet. The house was built on a slight hill, so the living room sat about 5 or 6 feet off the ground. When you looked out that window, you could see a solid mile of pine trees stretching out into the distance. In winter, the place felt especially eerie. The pine needles on the ground would catch just a little snow, enough to make the whole forest glow with reflected moonlight. You could sometimes see the dogs running around out there at night, little dark shapes moving through the white, quiet woods. I never liked that room or the window. Something about it made me uneasy. It felt like being watched, even when I was alone. One weekend, I had my cousin over. We were just two normal kids hanging out in the country. We spent some time throwing stuff into the fireplace to see what would happen. Old leaves, paper, bits of pine straw. We liked watching the fire crackle and pop. As the night wore on, the fire began to die down. We got cold, so we dragged all the couch cushions and blankets into the living room and built this big makeshift fort. We planned to crash there for the night, cozy in our blanket kingdom, just talking and goofing around. It was late when the dogs started barking. They were way out in the yard, almost a mile away, barking loud and clear. The property was huge, so I figured they were just chasing some animal that had wandered onto the farm, probably something small and dumb that didn't know it was trespassing. I wasn't worried about it at all. My cousin was standing by the big window, staring out silently. After a minute or two, I asked what was up. He didn't say anything at first, just kept staring. Then he said he felt like he was seeing something, but wasn't sure. Naturally, I got a little nervous and started looking out with him. At first, nothing. Just the trees and the moonlight and the snow reflecting off the ground. Then, slowly we saw it, a shadow moving between the trees. It wasn't running or jumping, just walking briskly from one pine to the next, maybe 100 yards from the house. We couldn't tell if the person was coming closer or not because the snow and moonlight made it hard to judge distance. We just stood there, frozen, watching. The thing is, we didn't freak out right away. Maybe because part of us hoped we were imagining it, or that it was just some trick of the light. But we both saw the same thing. After a few minutes, the figure disappeared behind some trees. Then it happened again. Another figure, another tree, walking the same way. This one was closer, maybe 50 feet closer than the first. It moved in short bursts, showing up and then vanishing behind the trees. This kept happening every few minutes for about half an hour. Two figures, moving silently through the woods, showing themselves just long enough to be seen before disappearing again. The strangest thing was how calm we felt about it. No shouting, no running. We just kept watching. I guess it was because the woods around us were so isolated. We didn't have neighbors close by, just miles and miles of federal forest. No one would be out here unless they really meant to be. It was creepy knowing that whoever it was, they were definitely on our property. At one point, my cousin whispered that he thought they were watching us too. That's when the feeling really sank in. The idea that these people weren't just wandering through, but were aware of the house, of us watching. Then one of them stopped moving. Instead of disappearing behind a tree, they stayed right in front of the window. We could see the figure clearly now, running straight toward the house. My heart started pounding, and I yelled for my dad. Dad was groggy, but got up and came to the living room with us. By the time he was awake and standing there, the figure was gone. We locked every door and window we could find, even though we'd never bothered before. We circled the house more than once, checking every possible way someone could get inside. No one was there. Dad didn't call the police. That wasn't his way. He always said we took care of our own. Instead, he stayed with us in the living room, staring out the big window, watching the forest. We took turns watching, hoping nothing else would happen. The next morning, we went outside to look around. The snow was melted in places, but where it stayed, we saw footprints, too many to count. They led between the trees, circling around the house, and then there were prints right beneath the window. That part scared me the most. I've been looking out from a window 5 feet off the ground, but whoever had been there was standing right at the base of the house, hidden by the hill. We never found out who they were or what they wanted. But after that night, I always felt like someone was watching whenever I looked out that window. I stopped sitting near it, and I never liked that living room again. It wasn't just the dark or the snow reflecting the moonlight. It was knowing that those footsteps were real, that someone had been close enough to touch the glass without us seeing. Even now, years later, I think about that night sometimes. How close they were, how quiet it was. The woods were supposed to be empty, but they weren't. Someone was there. Someone was watching. And they didn't leave until we were asleep. This is a long story, and I'll tell in a straightforward, clear way, focusing on what really happened without adding anything supernatural or unreal. It's a story that stuck with me for years because it shows how people can lose their minds in tough, lonely places, and how fear and isolation can turn things tragic without any need for ghosts or magic. My grandfather's company was expanding. They did timber and mining, and they had operations in different parts of the world. One of the places they wanted to set up a new office was in a remote region of a third world country. It was a place far from cities, with poor roads and little infrastructure. Not a place many foreigners would want to live, but the natural resources were worth the trouble. My grandfather got a local contact to help find a building for the office. The contact found an old house for rent that was dirt cheap, unbelievably cheap, even for that part of the world where prices were low to begin with. The house was old, made of wood and stone, with 2 floors. The plan was to have the office on the lower floor and the manager live on the top floor with his family. Now, locals immediately warned my grandfather about the house. They said it was haunted, cursed, whatever. They told him everyone who ever lived there died violently. The story was well known in the village. Everyone who tried to live in that house ended up dead, sometimes in gruesome ways. The locals avoided the place and called it cursed. But my grandfather, being a practical man and used to tough places, shrugged it off as superstition. He figured it was just old stories made up to scare people away. Houses in that area were often run down and death from accidents or sickness happened, so maybe the rumors just grew. Plus, the price was right. He sent a man to be the manager of the new office and to live there with his wife and 3 kids. The man was in his 40s, steady, with a good work record. His family was young, kids between 5 and 10 years old. They packed up and moved into the house, ready to start the job. The house itself was strange. It sat isolated on a small hill, surrounded by dense jungle and scrub. There was a narrow dirt road leading to it, barely passable during the rainy season. The house showed signs of years of neglect. Peeling paint, creaky floors, broken windows patched with old wood. The air was heavy and smelled of damp wood and mold. The locals didn't like going near it. Even during the day, the place had a silence around it that felt unnatural, like the forest was holding its breath. At first, everything seemed fine. The manager sent reports to the company and updates to my grandfather about the progress. The office was set up downstairs, and the family settled into the top floor. The kids went to a small village school, and the wife tried to keep the house in order. But then the messages stopped. Weeks went by without any word. At first, my grandfather thought it was just a power outage or problems with the local network. That kind of thing happened often in remote places. But when a whole month passed without a single update, concern grew. My grandfather tried calling the local police and officials, asking them to check on the man and his family. The police sent a small team out to the house. What they found was worse than anyone expected. The house was a scene of horror. Inside, all 5 members of the family were dead. Not peacefully, not by accident, but brutally murdered. The manager had killed his wife and children with a machete, then turned the same weapon on himself. It wasn't quick or clean. The bodies were hacked apart, multiple deep wounds. The police report said there were decapitations, dismemberments, and blood everywhere, splatter on the walls, the floor, and even the ceiling. The amount of blood and violence suggested a frenzy, not a calm or planned act. The report mentioned the man had barricaded the front door with a heavy wooden bed frame, pushing the bodies of his wife and kids against it. The bed was large and old, the kind that's hard to move, and it had been jammed to stop anyone from entering or escaping. It looked like a desperate attempt to keep something out or to protect the family in a twisted way. The police and locals found it strange, and the villagers believed the man had been possessed by evil spirits. But my grandfather and the officers thought it was just the work of a disturbed mind. There was talk of a magic machete from the villagers, a blade that drove the man mad or gave him strength to kill and kill himself. But that was nonsense. Blood pressure and rage can explain how the blood got everywhere, including the ceiling, not spirits throwing bodies. Still, the scene was so grotesque, it was hard for anyone to believe it wasn't something supernatural. My grandfather had to act quickly. The news was too shocking and would damage the company's reputation badly. The police were bribed to keep the report quiet and to classify the deaths as natural causes, which made no sense, but corruption ran deep there. Everyone involved was made to sign non-disclosure agreements. The house was left empty. No one wanted to work there, not even after my grandfather tried to find replacements. The story was whispered in the company like a curse. One man was promoted to the fancy title of office manager and told to take over the setup. But after seeing the house and hearing what happened, he quit immediately. The place was avoided. The locals wouldn't go near it, and anyone from the company who had to visit refused to stay overnight. My grandfather never tried to send anyone else there again. As for the house, it still stands on that lonely hill, surrounded by jungle and silence, waiting for someone brave enough or crazy enough to move in. But the truth, as far as I understand it, is this. The man lost his mind, living far from everything in a decaying old house with no neighbors for miles can break a person. The pressure of the job, the isolation, and maybe mental illness combined until he snapped. He killed his family in a fit of rage or despair and then ended his own life in the worst way possible. No ghosts or curses, just a tragic, violent end brought on by loneliness, stress, and mental breakdown. Sometimes, the real horror is just what people are capable of when pushed too far, alone with their darkest thoughts. That's what happened in that house. And no matter how many stories try to explain it differently, that's the reality. The house should have been left alone. And maybe some places are better left that way. Empty, silent, and far from human touch. When I was about 13 years old, our dog ran away from home. This wasn't the first time. It happened a few times before. The gate in the backyard was often left open by accident. Someone in the family, maybe my mom or one of my siblings, would forget to shut it properly. It wasn't a big deal most of the time because we lived in a pretty decent neighborhood, not the kind of place where you'd expect trouble. Our dog, a small white mutt with a curly tail and big brown eyes, was curious but never went far. Usually, she'd wander into the alleys behind the houses, sniffing around the trash bins or poking her nose into bushes. She liked to explore, but the minute she saw me or another family member, she'd drop whatever she was messing with and run back. I'd go find her and bring her home. It was simple. Usually, I didn't worry much. The neighborhood was quiet, and the kids played outside during the day. People watched out for each other, and dogs were common. Nobody ever thought something bad could happen. But this one time, everything changed. It started like any other time. I noticed the back gate was wide open when I went outside. Our dog was nowhere in sight. The sun was already dipping low, and the shadows in the alley stretched long and thin. I called her name softly, then louder, walking down the path behind her house. No response. I checked the bushes, the trash bins, the little corners she liked to hide in. Nothing. I started to get a bad feeling. Not the kind of feeling I knew from a scary movie or a bad dream, but a real, deep unease that clutched at my chest. I began walking further than usual. She never went more than a couple blocks from the house, but now I found myself walking 6 blocks away to an area I rarely went to because it was lined with older townhomes and rental properties. The buildings were packed close together, and the yards were smaller and less cared for than in our neighborhood. The grass was patchy, the fences worn and sometimes broken. There was a smell in the air, a mix of garbage and something else I couldn't place. I looked down every alley and peeked over fences as best as I could, calling her name again and again. My voice started to shake, and tears welled up in my eyes. The sun was almost gone now, the street lights flickering on. I was almost ready to give up. Maybe she would come back home on her own. Maybe she'd find her way back like she always did. Then I saw it, a slight movement behind a wooden fence. It was the kind of fence you'd see around a small backyard, made of splintery wood panels that had been bleached gray by years of sun and rain. I thought I heard a yip, faint but clear. My heart jumped. I walked closer, careful not to make noise. There she was, my dog, muddy and wet, chained to a post in the yard behind the fence. Her white fur was dirty, matted in places, and her eyes were wide, full of fear and desperation. She pulled at the chain, barking softly, trying to reach me. She looked so small and helpless, and I could see the collar around her neck with her tags dangling. I wanted to scream with relief, but instead, I tried to stay calm. I rang the doorbell on the house. Nobody came at first. I waited, then rang again. I heard voices inside, muffled talking, but no one came to the door. Finally, an older man, Asian, opened it just a crack. His eyes were cold, and he looked suspiciously at me. I told him who I was, that the dog was mine, that I was happy they found her and took her in. But he stared back like I was lying. He denied having a dog. I pointed to the dog in his yard, and she barked at me again, but he acted like it wasn't there. He looked annoyed, like I was wasting his time. My heart pounded. I didn't know what to think. The man left the door open a crack and disappeared back inside. I stood there frozen, afraid to move. The dog kept barking, tugging on the chain. I went around the side of the fence, ready to climb over if I had to. Before I could, the man came out through the patio door. He looked angry, but he unchained her and opened the gate. The dog ran straight to me, jumping into my arms, shaking and scared. She was so dirty, so tired, but safe. The man walked back inside without a word, his face hard and dark. After that, I never let our dog wander far. If the gate was open again, she stayed close, usually right outside the yard, waiting for someone to come let her back in. I never forgot the look in that man's eyes, the way he acted like she wasn't his problem. I don't know what he wanted or why he kept her like that, but I didn't want to find out. That night, I sat with our dog in my room, holding her close. I kept the window shut and the door locked. I felt scared in a way I hadn't before. I knew I was lucky to find her, lucky she ran to me when she did. Sometimes, when the wind blew through the cracks in the old fence outside, I'd think about that yard and the man who didn't care. And I knew I'd never forget that feeling of helplessness, of being just a kid with a lost dog in a part of town where kindness wasn't guaranteed. From then on, I watched the gate. I made sure it stayed shut, and I never let her out of my sight. When I was in elementary school, my family decided to add on to our house. We lived in an old colonial home that was built to be historically accurate. The floors were soft wood, probably 200 years old, and my parents had gone through the trouble of using paint colors that matched the original style of the house. It was a big deal to them to keep the house looking as authentic as possible, even if it made things more expensive or difficult. The plan was to add a new section to the back of the house, something to give us more space. My parents hired an architect who specialized in historic homes, so the addition would match perfectly. Then they hired a contractor to do the work. The contractor was supposed to be experienced, but from the start, things didn't go smoothly. Because of the style of the house and the type of wood we had used, my parents wanted all the wood trim in the new part to be painted. The wood was actually really good quality, and the paint would protect it, keeping the old-fashioned look while making sure it lasted. But the contractor didn't want to paint it. He said it was a waste of time, that the wood looked fine as it was, and that painting would just slow things down. This argument went on for months. The contractor would say one thing, my parents would push back, and nothing got done. The contractor and his team kept showing up and getting paid, but progress was almost zero. The work was slow, and the parts that did get done were often sloppy or rushed. After about a year of this back and forth, with almost no real progress, my parents decided to find a new contractor. They went through some connections, and my dad's lawyer, who went to the same church as them, recommended someone else. This new contractor had a team, mostly from their church group. My parents thought this would be better, someone they could trust more. When the new crew started, things changed. They seemed more respectful, more focused. Since it was summer and the weather was hot and humid, sticky and heavy, I was often sent outside by my mom to bring lemonade, water, or snacks to the workers. I was about 9 years old, and my parents always taught me to be polite and friendly to people working at our house. The workers were nice to me. They smiled and talked a bit, mostly about simple things like school or sports, whatever I found interesting at that age. There was one guy in particular who stood out. His name was Kenny. He wasn't the official contractor, but seemed to be the one in charge on site most days. The actual contractor rarely came by, and Kenny managed most of the work. He was always kind, always patient when I came out with drinks. I remember he never said anything that made me uncomfortable. He seemed like a friendly, regular guy, and as a kid, that's all I really noticed. The work went on for over 2 years. It took a long time, but finally, the addition was finished. The new part of the house fit in well with the old style, just like the architect had planned. It was a relief to my parents, and the construction crew packed up and left. A few months later, I was at the kitchen table with my mom, and she was looking at the newspaper. That's when I first saw Kenny's name. He had been arrested and put in prison for charges related to pedophilia. The story said he had been on a sex offender list before, but the contractor never told my parents about this. None of us had any idea. It was terrifying to think about. I was 9, my brother was a little older and in middle school, and sometimes my parents would leave us home alone while the workers were there. I remembered how Kenny had always been around, always nice to me. What if things could have gone wrong? It gave me chills even now, thinking back. What's worse is that I realized how little information we had been given. The contractor had known, but he didn't tell anyone. He had hired Kenny even though he knew Kenny's background. It made me wonder about trust and how easy it is for people like that to hide in plain sight. The thought that someone so dangerous could be working in our home, around my family, without us knowing, was a nightmare. Looking back, I can't help but replay all the little moments. The times Kenny helped me carry things, the times he joked with me quietly, the times my parents were out and Kenny was there. There was nothing obvious then, no red flags that I could see as a kid. But the truth was, he had a secret that none of US knew, and that secret could have destroyed us. My parents were angry and hurt when they found out. They felt betrayed by the contractor and worried about how close we had been to danger without knowing it. We had trusted people to protect us and keep us safe, and instead, someone who shouldn't have been there was given access to our home and family. I don't like to think about it much because it's too frightening, but I also know it's important to remember, to be careful about who you trust, even when they seem nice, to pay attention to what you don't know as much as what you do, and to always look out for the safety of your kids, no matter what. This experience taught me a lot about how people can hide in plain sight and how important it is for parents to be aware of who is around their children, even when everything seems normal. I'm thankful nothing bad happened, but the fact that it could have is enough to haunt me for a long time. I was 16, and that night still haunts me to this day. It started out like any other weekend where my grandmother was staying with me. She'd come over sometimes, and we'd share the same bedroom, a small room at the back of the house with one window and an old wooden door that always creaked when the wind blew. I had this habit of washing my clothes and hanging them to dry over the door frame of my room. It was just a simple metal bar across the top of the door, and I clipped my shirts and pants there so they drip dry without taking up space on the floor or furniture. That night, I woke up suddenly. It was probably around 2 or 3 in the morning. My room was dark, but not pitch black. The faint glow of a street lamp outside filtered in through the window. The moon was almost full, casting a pale light that hit the door frame just enough for me to make out shapes. I blinked a few times, my eyes still heavy from sleep, and then I saw movement. My clothes, the ones hanging over the door, were rustling softly like something was brushing against them, moving through them. At first, I thought it might be a rat or some small animal. The house was old, and sometimes mice got in, but then I saw legs. They weren't normal legs. They were gray and veiny, like the skin had dried up and stretched tight over something too thin. They moved slowly, the joints bending in odd ways, making soft scratching sounds on the door as they shifted through my clothes. I sat up, heart hammering. My sleepy eyes started to focus better, adjusting to the dark. What I saw next shook me so deeply that I still don't fully understand it. There, just on the other side of the door frame, was the most grotesque thing I've ever laid eyes on in my life. I didn't know what it was, but it felt like something from a nightmare. It was thin, so thin that its ribs and bones seemed pressed against its skin like the skin might tear at any second. The stomach stuck out oddly, almost swollen, like it was bloated but soft at the same time. The skin was the same gray I'd seen on the legs, covered in thick, dark veins that twisted and moved as if alive. The hands were the worst part. They weren't normal hands at all. Instead of fingers, it had long, pointed sticks, sharp, twig-like fingers that moved slowly through my clothes like they were inspecting or searching for something. I could see the stick-like fingers tap and slide over the fabric, bending and cracking with a dry sound. Its face was the last thing I saw clearly. The chin was long and pointed, sticking out in a way that looked almost unnatural. Its eyes were huge, with no eyelids at all, just round, black orbs that reflected the dim light in my room like deep, empty wells. The mouth was tiny, almost a small hole, but it puckered and moved in this strange way like it was licking or sucking on an invisible lollipop. I remember feeling sick just watching that. The creature's back was hunched, and it looked like its shoulders and spine were pushing out of the strange hospital gown it wore. That faded, ragged fabric looked torn and dirty, hanging off its thin frame. It didn't move away or hide when it noticed me awake. Instead, it just stared, unblinking, like it was surprised I could see it. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I shook my grandmother's arm hard, desperate to wake her, but she was deep in sleep. The creature didn't blink or flinch. It only kept staring. I stared back, frozen in fear, trying to will my grandmother awake. After a long moment, she stirred and opened her eyes. She looked toward the door, but the creature was gone, vanished like it was never there. In the days and weeks leading up to that night, strange things had been happening around the house. At first, it was little stuff, doors slamming shut by themselves, even locking on their own without anyone touching them. Sometimes I'd wake up and feel like something was watching me from the shadows, but when I looked, nothing was there. The most unsettling nights were when I woke up feeling cold, with the sensation of hands running over my feet and legs. It felt real, multiple hands, cold and clammy, but when I opened my eyes, nothing was there. I started having nightmares that felt too vivid, filled with shadows and twisted figures reaching for me. After the night I saw that creature, I told my parents everything. I didn't want to keep it a secret anymore because I was scared. They decided to call in someone to perform an exorcism on my room, hoping it would help. I don't know if that ritual really made anything disappear or if it just helped me feel safer in my own space. But since then, I haven't seen or felt anything strange. The door hasn't slammed by itself anymore. I haven't woken up to the feeling of hands touching me. I sleep with my door closed, tightly shut every night. I still think about that night, the gray figure with those terrible, stick-like fingers and unblinking eyes. Sometimes I wonder if it was a real thing or just a dark part of my tired teenage mind. But even now, years later, I'm not sure I want to know the answer. That moment, when I looked at that creature and it looked right back at me, remains one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced. It's why I'll never sleep with the door open again. I remember the hospital room clearly, even though it was months ago now. It was quiet, almost too quiet for a place like that. The kind of silence that presses in on you until you start hearing things that aren't really there. My grandpa lay there, frail and pale, hooked up to machines that beeped softly, keeping track of the last bits of life he had left. He had told us all before, clear as day, that when it was time for him to go, he didn't want to be kept alive by machines. He wanted to pass naturally, without all the extra pain and wires holding him in place. I believed him. I knew he was ready, and I was ready to let him go too. But my family wasn't. Not my grandmother, not my mom, my aunt, or my uncle. When the doctors said Grandpa's heart was weak and the damage was severe, they refused to accept it. Instead, they pushed for him to be intubated. I was furious. They lied about what the doctors said, claiming the doctors hadn't given a clear answer, but that they were still hoping for a miracle. I knew the truth. I had just been through a kind of nightmare that made everything painfully clear to me. My daughter was born early, really early, at just 29 weeks. She was tiny, fragile, and her body was already failing in ways no one could fix. We found out she had trisomy 18, a condition that meant she wouldn't live long. The doctors were honest with us, but the truth still hit like a hammer. I watched her struggle every day, hooked up to machines, breathing tubes, and monitors that screamed warnings if anything went wrong. I held her in my arms the night she passed. It was the hardest thing I ever did, but I did it because I couldn't let her suffer anymore, and I refused to let her die alone inside that cold incubator. She deserved to feel love, warmth, and peace when it was her time. The whole experience shattered me. I felt broken, helpless, and so damn angry. But what hurt the most was knowing my family didn't understand what it meant to lose someone like that. They were selfish. They couldn't accept death, so they clung to false hope, stretching out suffering instead of ending it. They made the same mistakes with Grandpa. I hated that they dragged him through weeks of extra pain, extra machines, extra false hope. It wasn't right. He died exactly 4 months after my daughter's funeral. I spent so many nights lying awake, the weight of all that loss pressing on my chest like a stone. I kept replaying the moments in my head, wishing I could have done something differently, wishing I could have convinced my family to let go sooner. But I couldn't. The hardest part wasn't just losing them. It was watching people I love suffer because they refused to face the truth. There's a quiet kind of grief that doesn't fade. It lives in the small things, the silence of a hospital room, the empty crib, the cold hospital bed where a body once lay. I still feel it, months later, in the way I breathe, in the way I move through my days. Sometimes it's a dull ache, sometimes it's a sharp pain that takes my breath away. But through all that pain, I learned something important. When it's someone's time to go, there's no fighting it. No machine, no medicine, no desperate hope can change that. What matters is how we treat them in their last moments. Whether they're surrounded by love or trapped in endless tubes and wires. I believe my grandpa wanted to go peacefully without all the extra suffering. I believe my daughter deserved the same. Now, when I think back, I don't regret holding my daughter as she passed. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was right. I was there for her when she needed me most. That's what love looks like in the end. It's not about denying death or hoping for miracles. It's about choosing peace and dignity for those we love. Losing both of them in such a short time broke me, but it also taught me to see death differently. It's not the enemy I once feared. It's a part of life, a moment that we can't control, but can prepare for in how we live and how we say goodbye. I hope my family understands that someday, because it's a lesson I learned the hard way. When it's time, we have to let go. Holding on only makes the pain last longer. And sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is to let someone pass on their own terms with love and dignity surrounding them until the very end. When I was in nursing school, which was a long time ago now, I remember a patient who left a mark on me, not just because of what happened, but because of how strange and unsettling it was. It wasn't anything supernatural, no ghost stories or weird curses. It was just a real, raw experience that made me question how much control we really have in medicine sometimes. This woman was in her late 70s, early 80s, and had been admitted for complications from congestive heart failure. I'll call her Mrs. T. She was the kind of patient who had made it very clear before she got too sick that she didn't want to be resuscitated under any circumstances. She told the doctors, the nurses, even her family, that if she ever went into cardiac arrest, she wanted no heroic measures taken. She wanted a do not resuscitate order, a DNR, and it was written clearly in her medical records. Mrs. T was sharp for her age, despite her heart problems. She could explain her wishes clearly and made sure everyone understood them. We all respected that. The hospital staff knew about her code status, and the care team honored it. When you're a nurse, you learn to accept patients' wishes like that, even when it's hard. You're there to care for people, not to force treatments on them that go against their will. But things changed. Over the next few weeks, Mrs. T's condition got worse. She became confused and less responsive. Her mental state altered, and she couldn't make decisions for herself anymore. That's when her family stepped in. They had power of attorney, which meant they could make medical decisions on her behalf. Now, this was where things got complicated. Her children came in and insisted that she be full code. They wanted everything done to keep her alive, CPR, shocks, breathing tubes, the whole lot, even though it was against what their mother had said and what was in her chart before she lost capacity. The doctors and nurses explained the situation, but legally, with power of attorney, the family's wishes had to be followed. I remember feeling uneasy about that. It's one thing when a patient tells you directly what they want. It's another when the people making decisions for them are doing the opposite of what the patient clearly said before. But that's the reality we face in medicine sometimes. We have to follow the law and hospital policies. Mrs. T's care plan was changed. Her code status was updated to full code. The DNR order was reversed. We prepared for the possibility that she might go into cardiac arrest and that we would have to resuscitate her. Then the night came. I was working the evening shift on the medical floor where Mrs. T was staying. She was resting in her bed, quiet and pale. The machines showed her heart was weak, but stable. Suddenly, the monitors started to beep loudly, the kind of alarm that makes your stomach drop. Her heart went into ventricular fibrillation, VFib, a life-threatening arrhythmia. There was no pulse, no breathing. The room was tense, every nurse and doctor rushing in. CPR started immediately. Chest compressions, breaths with the bag valve mask, everything as per ACLS protocols. The crash cart was wheeled in fast, and the defibrillator was turned on. The doctor was ready to deliver the first shock. He placed the pads on her chest and pressed the button. The machine should have delivered a powerful electrical shock to try and reset her heart's rhythm. But nothing happened. The machine didn't fire. The doctor pressed again. Nothing. Over and over he tried. The machine wouldn't deliver the shock. We checked the connections, made sure the pads were on right, double-checked the cables. The machine was on, the settings were correct, but it refused to work. The tension in the room grew thicker. We kept doing CPR, giving breaths, trying to keep some oxygen going. The clock was ticking. Finally, Mrs. T's heart stopped completely. There was no response, no pulse, no breathing. After several minutes, the doctor called time of death. Right after he said that, we all noticed something strange. The defibrillator suddenly powered up fully. It began to work perfectly, the same machine that had just refused to shock her. It was as if the machine only decided to work the instant she died. The hospital's biomedical engineers later tested the defibrillator multiple times. They reported that it had no faults. The machine was checked daily, as required, and had never before or since failed during an emergency. The entire staff was shaken. We had a machine that wouldn't deliver a shock in a moment when it was desperately needed, and then it worked perfectly once it was too late. Everyone was quiet and uneasy about it. We didn't talk about ghosts or anything supernatural. It wasn't that kind of story. It was something more real, more unsettling, because it was so inexplicable. After that night, The hospital reviewed the incident thoroughly. We followed all procedures, double-checked the defibrillator's maintenance logs, and talked about the difficult ethics of power of attorney overriding a patient's wishes. But there was no clear explanation for why the defibrillator failed in that moment. Mrs. T ultimately got what she had wanted all along, even if it wasn't in the way anyone expected. For me, that night stayed with me for years. It was a reminder that medicine isn't perfect and that sometimes the machines we rely on fail in the strangest ways. It was also a harsh lesson in respecting patient autonomy, even when the people with legal authority might want something different. I've been a nurse for over 20 years now, and I've never seen anything like that again. Machines breaking down during a code is almost unheard of. Usually, everything works exactly as it should because lives depend on it. But that night, there was a strange silence in the hospital room, broken only by the rhythm of chest compressions and the steady beep of monitors. And in the end, Mrs. T's final wishes were honored, just not by anyone's hands. I was just a kid when it happened, maybe 10 or 11 years old. My family had planned a hunting trip with my dad, a few uncles, and some cousins. Hunting wasn't something I liked or felt comfortable with. I wasn't against animals or anything like that, but I couldn't see the point in shooting for fun or bragging rights. To me, killing an animal only made sense if it was for food. But I still went along, mostly because it was what my family did, and I didn't want to be left out. I had my Game Boy with me, the only thing that made the trip bearable. My dad's idea was to keep me at one of the ground blinds near the edge of the woods so I could use the radio to alert them if any deer came close. The ground blind was a small, camouflaged wooden box with windows to peek out of, designed so you could stay hidden while watching the woods. It felt like a prison to me, sitting there all day with nothing to do except watch and wait. I spent hours grinding in Pokemon, trying to level up my team. But eventually, even that got boring. I turned off the game and started digging through my backpack, looking for something else to pass the time. I was alone in the blind, with only the quiet sounds of the forest around me. The smell of pine needles, damp earth, and something faintly like old wood filled the air. Occasionally, a bird would chirp or a branch would snap far off in the distance, but nothing else moved. Then, I heard a weird sound. It was like a soft whooshing, almost like the wind, but it felt different, closer, heavier somehow. I paused and looked out the window, but I couldn't see anything. Curious and a little nervous, I decided to step outside the blind to look around. The air was cool and smelled like rain might be coming, even though the sky was clear. I stepped carefully on the soft dirt, the ground slightly damp from an earlier drizzle. As I walked around to the backside of the blind, I froze. The entire outer wall, the wooden panels I'd been leaning against moments before, was covered in spiders. Not just a few, but hundreds, maybe thousands. They were daddy long legs, those thin-legged spiders with tiny bodies, but the sheer number of them made my skin crawl like nothing else I'd ever seen. They weren't just sitting there quietly either. They were crawling over each other, weaving together in a thick, moving blanket of legs and bodies. The way they tangled and twined into one another made it look like the wall itself was alive, pulsating softly. My heart started racing, my hands shaking so badly I could barely pull the radio off my belt. My stomach turned and my skin felt like it was crawling all over. I thought about running, just sprinting through the trees, trying to get back to camp. But the forest all looked the same, and I had no idea where I was. We'd been driven here early that morning, and I wasn't sure how to get back. The dirt road, the trucks, the tents, all of it felt miles away. So I stood there, frozen, looking for a way out. Then, I had what I thought was a brilliant idea. I'd brought a can of off, insect repellent with me, just in case, along with a lighter in my backpack. I figured I could spray the spiders off the wall, then burn the ones left over with a quick flame from the lighter. It made sense in my head. The spiders would scatter, and I'd be safe. I was stupid to think that would work. I pulled out the off and the lighter and took a deep breath. I sprayed the wall, watching the spiders twitch and fall off. The smell of the repellent filled the air, sharp and chemical. Then I flicked the lighter and touched the flame to the soaked wood. Almost immediately, the spiders reacted. They didn't just fall off and run. They let go, hundreds of them, and started flying at me. It was like the whole wall exploded into a living, writhing mass, with flaming spiders flying through the air in every direction. I screamed. My voice cracked and my throat felt raw as the burning spiders landed on my arms, legs, and face. The pain was immediate, sharp like tiny needles. I started flailing and rolling on the ground, desperate to shake them off. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The smell of burning spider and chemical spray mixed in the air, making me dizzy. I ripped off my jacket, then my shirt, trying to get the spiders off my skin. They clung to everything, their legs crawling under my clothes, their little bodies burning me as I rolled on the dirt. The ground was rough, scraping my skin, but I didn't care. All I wanted was to get those things off me. I grabbed the radio and called out to my dad in the panicked voice I didn't even recognize as my own. I told him to come get me. We were going home. I couldn't stay there one more second. I kept screaming, crying, and swearing like I never had before. The shame of being so scared, of losing control, didn't matter anymore. When my dad finally showed up with the others, they were shocked at the state I was in. My arms and legs had red welts where the spiders had bitten or burned me. My clothes were ruined, and I was still shaking uncontrollably. They helped me get cleaned up and took me back to the truck. I couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop talking about the spiders, the fire, the pain. That night in the truck, I sat with my head down, feeling raw and exposed in every way. The next days were a blur of doctor visits and explaining what happened. The bites weren't serious. Daddy long legs aren't poisonous. But the trauma ran much deeper than any physical injury. My family tried to be supportive, but I was embarrassed and angry with myself for what had happened. Over the next few months, the fear grew into something bigger. I started having nightmares about spiders crawling over me, covering every inch of my body. I'd wake up sweating, heart pounding. Even seeing a tiny spider in the house would make me freeze, my skin crawling with dread. I stopped going outside alone and would check every corner of a room before sitting down. The simple idea of spiders became a source of deep anxiety. I went through therapy. At first, I didn't want to. I thought I could just get over it. But the therapist helped me understand what I'd been through wasn't just fear, it was a trauma. She taught me ways to calm down when I saw spiders or felt panic rising. It took months, then years, but I slowly started to feel more in control. Now, I'm still careful around spiders. I don't panic the way I used to, but I don't like to be near them. I know that most spiders won't hurt me, and that what I went through was an extreme event, but the memory of that day stays with me. It's hard to forget the feeling of being surrounded by thousands of those long-legged creatures, feeling trapped and helpless. That hunting trip changed how I see things. It taught me that sometimes fear isn't just a simple feeling. It's something that can take over your whole mind and body. It showed me how important it is to face what scares you, even if it takes time and help. I still don't like hunting, and I still don't enjoy shooting things. But I carry that day with me, a reminder of how real fear can be, and how sometimes the smallest creatures can cause the biggest nightmares. Every time I see a spider now, I remember that wall of spiders on the blind, crawling, burning, flying at me. And I'm thankful I got out alive. But I'll never forget that fear, and I'll never be the same. The hallway was quiet that afternoon. The kind of quiet you notice more because the usual office hum was missing. It was one of those slow days when most people were busy at their desks or out at meetings, and I was just making my way back from the break room. The floor was smooth and polished, the fluorescent lights above humming softly. I liked that hallway. It was long, straight, and predictable. Nothing like the chaos of my usual workload. I was wearing a pair of black heels I'd bought for work that morning. They looked good, sleek, and professional, but they didn't feel very comfortable after a few hours on my feet. Still, I wanted to look put together. The way the heel clicked softly against the tile as I walked gave me a little confidence boost. A small reminder that I could manage being in control today. As I moved down the hallway, I passed by the office of one of my coworkers, a a woman who worked in a small office just off the hall. She had a neat desk piled with papers and a few family photos stuck to the wall. I could hear faint typing from inside. She was always quiet, polite but distant. I barely knew her beyond the usual polite nods and greetings in passing. That's when it happened. My heel caught on something, maybe a small crack in the tile or a scuff I hadn't seen, and suddenly the world tilted. The sharp click of my heel hitting the floor was followed by a twisting, jarring pain in my lower leg. I didn't fall. I didn't even stumble forward. But my leg bent in a way that felt completely wrong, like a twig snapping under pressure. I heard a sickening crunch inside my leg, and I felt it too, a sudden sharp pain shooting through my fibula. Instinctively, I lowered myself slowly down to the floor. I didn't scream or yell, but I groaned softly, trying to stay calm. My breath came out in quick bursts as I fought the shock. The pain was intense but strange, not just sharp, but also a deep ache that spread down my leg and up my thigh. My mind raced, realizing something was seriously wrong. The strange feeling, the odd bent angle of my leg, made me know the damage was bad. From inside the office nearby, the door opened suddenly and my coworker stepped out. She must have heard the noise, the crunch, the subtle but unmistakable sound of something breaking. She froze when she saw me sitting on the floor, my leg bent awkwardly, my face twisted in pain. Her eyes widened in shock, her breath caught in her throat, and she looked like she wanted to scream but couldn't. She didn't come closer. Instead, she took a small step back, almost as if the sight had frozen her in place. She never said anything that day. She just stared, and that look, the pale, wide-eyed shock, haunted me more than the pain. Later, after the ambulance came and I was rushed to the hospital, I learned I had fractured my fibula badly. The doctor said the bone snapped cleanly, but was stable enough to be set with a cast and crutches. The injury would take months to heal. The physical pain was one thing, but the other part was the feeling that I'd caused something terrible for my coworker. The way she looked was raw fear, a kind of silent trauma that I wasn't sure how to explain. When I returned to work weeks later, walking slowly on crutches, I noticed how she avoided eye contact. She moved around the office carefully, almost as if she was watching for any sign that something awful might happen again. The office felt colder, quieter in a way that wasn't natural. I could tell she was shaken deeply by that day. I later heard from others that she'd had nightmares about the sound of my leg breaking, the loud, crunchy noise that had echoed down the quiet hallway. She told a few close coworkers that she couldn't sleep, that sometimes she would wake up in a sweat, heart racing, hearing that horrible snap replay over and over in her mind. She even said she had trouble staying alone in the office, feeling like something might break or fall again, like the quiet space had suddenly become dangerous. I didn't blame her. I still felt guilty. Even though it was an accident, I understood how real trauma could come from the smallest moments. The months passed slowly. I worked on getting my legs stronger, going to physical therapy sessions, and doing the slow, painful exercises that were supposed to help me walk again normally. Each day was a reminder of what had happened. Each small step was a battle against fear. Fear of falling again, fear of the pain, fear of breaking something inside me. But I also noticed something else, how trauma affects people differently. For me, the pain was physical and temporary. For her, the pain was invisible but lasting. Eventually, the quiet office started to feel less tense. My coworker gradually relaxed, although I could tell the memory still lingered in her eyes. I tried to be patient, giving her space, showing up to work every day without pushing for conversations or apologies. The incident had changed us both in ways that no words could fix overnight. Looking back now, I realize how powerful a single moment can be. Not just a moment of pain for me, but the moment of shock and fear for someone else. The snap of my fibula wasn't just a break in my bone. It was a break in the quiet routine of our office, a moment that shook someone's sense of safety in a place where we all should feel secure. That day changed my work life forever. It made me more aware of how fragile we all are, physically and mentally. And it made me understand how even something as simple as a loud noise, a broken bone, or a sudden fall can leave a deep mark on someone else's mind. I don't wear heels to work anymore, and I never walk down that hallway the same way. Every step feels heavier, slower, careful, because I know how close we all are to breaking in ways we can see and in ways we can't.